Chapter 157. Tienga's spirit was lifted when she found spiritual aura on the incense burner on the altar. This valley was clearly an ordinary one. The flowers and trees here didn't have spiritual aura, but this incense burner actually had spiritual aura, so it must be unusual. After examining it for a while, she finally used a spell to move the incense burner away and finally found the source of the spiritual aura. While flying in the air, Tienga looked down. The altar, the stone statues, and the surrounding tall trees were clearly a formation that didn't need spiritual aura after it evolved. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. There were also formations in the mortal world. Those formations didn't need spiritual aura, but they were evolved from formations in the cultivation world. Their purpose was to confuse the judgment of mortals. If cultivators used their divine sense and magic, they would naturally be able to break them. Tienga put her palms together and cast a spell. The incense burner on the altar instantly exploded, revealing the things inside. Spiritual aura soared into the sky, and the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. The sky darkened. Tienga raised her head and looked around with a frown. A formation within a formation. This formation was a real formation from the world of cultivators. The stone statues and altars she saw just now were all gone, leaving only an empty wilderness. No, this was an illusion. She held the shuttle of flying Apsara in her hand and summoned the white silk handkerchief. Tienga instantly flew up and made a hand seal. After making several extremely complicated hand seals, several spiritual auras were sent out at the same time. Whistling sounds came from the dark night, like the whimpers and roars of malicious spirits. Then, several spiritual auras counterattacked. Tienga shook her hand and summoned the white silk handkerchief, which turned into 4 brick walls and firmly blocked the counterattack. In the next moment, she put away the white silk handkerchief and took out the shuttle of flying Apsara, which turned into several golden lights and attacked. Puff, 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 puff. After several soft sounds, everything quieted down and the sky brightened. Tienga breathed a sigh of relief. This formation had been around for thousands of years, so its spiritual aura was already weak and its power was greatly reduced. That was why she could break it so easily. However, based on the technique used to lay this formation, its original power would probably even trap a nascent soul cultivator for a while. Could it be that the person who laid this formation was a nascent soul cultivator? With this thought in her mind, Tienga cautiously observed her surroundings. The formation was broken, and the scenery returned to its original appearance. A hole appeared under the incense burner, and spiritual energy surged out. Tienga was flabbergasted. There were obviously no spirit veins in this valley, so why did this cave emit such pure spiritual aura? This spiritual aura fluctuation was very similar to what she had felt before. Upon discovering this, Tienga cautiously approached it. She first used magic to probe it, then caught a live animal and put it inside. Only after confirming that there were no abnormalities did she slowly step inside. The cave entrance was extremely narrow, probably only wide enough for one person to pass through. Following the stone steps, they walked down step by step until they reached a spacious hall. Tienga flicked her finger, causing a cluster of flames to appear on her fingertip. With the eyesight of an immortal cultivator, although they could see things in the dark, it was very difficult. If there was an open flame, they would be able to see clearly. He raised his head and looked around. This hall was chiseled into the stone wall, and it looked like a cave. Could it be the cave of an ancient cultivator? After a brief moment of excitement, Tienga suddenly thought of something. No, that stone statue just now was obviously a person from several thousand years ago, so it shouldn't have anything to do with ancient cultivators. He walked past the hall and slowly walked along the stone path. The hall was very dark, but the spiritual aura was very dense. Tienga concluded that this was a small spirit vein that had been sealed by someone with a formation. Apparently, this was most likely a cultivator's cave, and this cultivator's cultivation level was definitely above the nascent soul realm. With this conclusion, Tienga's interest was finally piqued. Since the formation was still there, this cave shouldn't be an abandoned one. If that was the case, this nascent soul cultivator most likely passed away in this cave. What did the cave of a nascent soul cultivator passing away represent? This cave must contain the cultivator's treasures. Emotienga took out the shuttle of flying Apsara and circled around her vigilantly. After coming to this conclusion, Emotienga became even more cautious. The long stone path was filled with boundless darkness. After walking for a while, Emotienga suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. Although she was already an immortal in the eyes of mortals, she still felt a bit scared when faced with this kind of scene. She recalled her previous adventures. They were just killing each other. She had never faced the ignorant darkness alone. In the darkness, she could only hear her long and light breathing. The sound of breathing that she usually couldn't hear was exceptionally clear in the boundless silence. She could only see the flame on her fingertips. The rest was hazy, which made it even more terrifying. Realizing that her mood wasn't right, Emotienga closed her eyes and made a hand seal. The space between her eyebrows shone brightly, and she instantly entered the virtual sky world. Seeing the familiar bamboo house and the brook, her mood calmed down a bit. Sitting in the bamboo house, Emotienga couldn't help but shake her head. Sure enough, her mental state wasn't tempered enough. If that was the case, there would definitely be problems when she went through the inner demon during core formation. Fortunately, she came out to gain experience. Otherwise, even if her master was a nascent soul cultivator, he wouldn't be able to find any problems with her. She sat cross-legged and began to adjust her breath. She ran her great circulatory circle to confirm that her mood was calm before she prepared to go out and continue exploring. But before she could chant the incantation, she suddenly stopped. Outside the virtual sky world, a vague voice came, "Big Brother Xiao, take a rest first." This was Shangruan's voice. Emotienga made a hand seal and pointed her finger. Then, the voice became clear. "Big Brother Xiao." Shangruan's breathing was very loud. She seemed very tired. With her cultivation level in the early stage of the foundation building realm, there was no reason for her to feel tired. Could it be that she was injured? After a while, she finally heard Yao Zixio's voice. "Little Sister Wan, are you all right?" Shangruan panted for a while before her breathing gradually became smooth. She said, "Big Brother Xiao, why are you in such a hurry?" Emotienga could hear the complaint in her voice. Yao Zixio said, "We survived a disaster and found a cultivator's immortal's cave here. There might be some treasures inside, so of course I'm in a hurry. If Daoist Fangzheng and that female cultivator surnamed Yi find them, won't we have a share?" "So what if we don't have a share?" Shangruan was a bit annoyed. "Didn't you say being with me would be good? If we can be together, so what if we don't have any treasures?" After a while, Yao Zixio finally said, "Little Sister Wan, I'm doing this for the sake of us being together. We went through all kinds of hardships to escape. What if we get caught again? All these years, I've thought it through. Without cultivation level and strength, we don't have the right to speak. Back then, if my cultivation level wasn't too low, your father wouldn't have promised you to someone else. If we weren't too weak, we wouldn't have had to hide from place to place all these years and run to the secular world. Little Sister Wan, don't you understand? In the cultivation world, strength is the foundation of everything. Otherwise, it'd be hard for us to be together." "What's so hard about this?" Shangruan's voice was filled with anger. "If we find a place to live in seclusion, my father and the others won't be able to find us even if they want to die." As she said that, she once again softened. "Big Brother Xiao, what's wrong with you? You weren't like this before, why?" "Don't ask me why." Yao Zixio shouted. Emotienga was also startled by him. After thinking about it, she felt somewhat worried, so she tapped the space between her eyebrows. A bead emerged from there and she cast an art on it. A crack appeared in the virtual sky world, and she saw the Yao couple in the stone path. Shangruan also seemed to be startled by Yao Zixio. She stared at him in astonishment. However, Yao Zixio's expression softened, and he said in a gentle voice, "Little Sister Wan, I want to give you happiness, and not take you to hide from place to place. I want to bring you back openly one day, and let your father and the others know that your choice of me was right." Upon hearing what he said, Shang Ruan looked touched. You don't have to be like this. I've already said it before, I don't care what your cultivation level is. It's enough as long as I can be with you. No, little sister Wan, Yao Zixio insisted. I can't be that kind of cowardly man. If that's the case, everything your father said back then would be right. I only have 3 spiritual roots. Even building my foundation was very difficult for me. If you didn't secretly give me your foundation building pills, I don't even know if I could build my foundation. I want to prove to your father that although my aptitude isn't good, I can still build my foundation. After listening up to this point, Mo Tiange roughly understood what was going on with this Yao Zixio couple. These 2 people weren't individual cultivators whose clans had declined at all. They were cultivators who escaped from their clans. It was probably true that they were childhood sweethearts. After growing up together, they developed feelings for each other over time. However, Yao Zixio's aptitude was only average. He couldn't enter Shang Ruan's father's eyes, so he forbade the 2 of them from seeing each other. As a result, Shang Ruan secretly eloped with Yao Zixio. Perhaps there were some mistakes in the details, but that was most likely the case. However, Mo Tiange had a bad premonition when she heard what Yao Zixio said. Shang Ruan was in the middle of the situation, so she probably didn't notice Yao Zixio's hidden thoughts. He said he wanted to give her happiness, but his gaze was flickering in a place Shang Ruan couldn't see. She was afraid that this man was already unwilling to live a life that only had love. With a hint of a sneer on her face, Mo Tiange continued to listen to their conversation. Shang Ruan was finally convinced. She leaned against Yao Zixio's chest and said softly, "Big brother Xiao, don't worry. On our way here, we didn't find any traces left by other people. Presumably, we were the only ones who found them. I quite like that little sister from Yi clan, but I wonder if she's still alive. Rest assured, that girl's cultivation level is higher than ours. Even if the 2 of us joined hands, we probably wouldn't be able to defeat her. She also has a spiritual treasure, so she should be fine." "That's true," Yao Zixio said. "This fellow Daoist Yi, I really don't know her identity. How old do you think she is?" Shang Ruan thought for a moment then answered, "Although this little sister's behavior is steady, I can tell she's still a little girl at first glance. I can't give a specific age, but she's most likely below 80 years old." "Below 80 years old?" Yao Zixio's gaze flickered as he muttered, "At this age, she's actually already in the peak of the middle stage of the foundation building realm. If she's lucky, she'll probably be able to form her gold core when she's 100 years old, right? She must be an elite disciple of a big cultivation group." "Most likely," Shang Ruan said. "Judging from the spiritual treasure she has, it's far superior to her peers, so she definitely can't be an individual cultivator. I'm afraid a small cultivation group wouldn't be able to nurture someone like that." Yao Zixio nodded inwardly. His gaze was contemplative. "If that's the case, it's actually a gain." "What?" Shang Ruan didn't hear him clearly. Yao Zixio promptly chuckled. "It's nothing. Little sister Wan, are you feeling better? Should we keep going?" Chapter 158. Once the Yao couple had gone far away, Mo Tiange pressed the space between her eyebrows and came out of the virtual sky world. She stared in the direction they left, lost in thought. Shang Ruan didn't see it, but she did. This Yao Zixio's gaze kept drifting. She was afraid he didn't mean what he said. When he mentioned her, his gaze had a different meaning. Although Shang Ruan was observant, she trusted her husband wholeheartedly, so she didn't notice anything. Alas, based on their conversation, they once had an unforgettable love. They even ran away from home and eloped in spite of other people's gazes. Who would have thought that such an unforeseen event would happen after their loving companionship? That Yao Zixio was obviously unwilling. How could cultivators completely give up on their cultivation? When they eloped, they might have been sincere, but after they obtained her, they weren't willing to be like this for the rest of their lives, so they still wanted to advance their cultivation levels. What about bringing her back openly? That was all a lie. He just wanted to obtain power. After thinking for a while, Mo Tiange shook her head. This was someone else's business, it wasn't her place to meddle. It was just unfortunate for Shangruan. Although her cultivation level was average, her mental state surpassed many cultivation group disciples. Based on their conversation, her aptitude probably wasn't bad either. If she cultivated diligently, she might be able to advance. Wasn't Xianxia like this back then? At first, the two of them were loving and sweet, but as time passed, Meng Sigue developed some habits. The originally lively and enthusiastic Xianxia turned into a compromising person. This Shangruan was probably even more miserable. She abandoned everything to elope. If she lost everything in the end, wouldn't she lose everything? Her relatives would be gone, her clan would be gone, and her originally beautiful future would also be gone. It was no wonder second uncle said weakness and passion were the enemies of female cultivators. If this Shangruan wasn't bound by emotions and had her clan to back her up, her cultivation level would probably be far higher than her current one. As Emo Tienga pondered this, she couldn't help but sigh. Although that Yao Zixio harbored malicious intentions towards her, it didn't prevent them from having the same goal. Sensing that the two of them had already walked quite a distance ahead, Emo Tienga simply released her divine sense to lock onto the two of them. She then concealed herself and followed their tracks. Just like that, Emo Tienga followed the Yao couple all the way down the stone path in the darkness. She was unexpectedly safe and sound. What made Emo Tienga vigilant was that after the Yao couple entered a stone door with her divine sense, she couldn't sense any traces of them anymore. Just as Emo Tienga was hesitating whether she should enter this obviously mysterious stone door, she suddenly sensed another person's breath. It was Daoist Fangjing. Due to the incident with Yao Zixio, Emo Tienga naturally became even more vigilant. Once she sensed Daoist Fangjing's aura, she immediately activated the virtual sky mirror and hid inside it. Ha! Daoist Fangjing let out a cry of surprise, then vigilantly looked around for a while. He then quickly walked towards the stone door the Yao couple entered through. Similarly, after Daoist Fangjing entered that stone door, his aura disappeared without a trace. Just as Emo Tienga was about to come out of the virtual sky mirror, she saw another group of 5 people entering the hall. Among the 5 people, 2 male cultivators were in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, while the remaining 3 female cultivators were in the early stage of the foundation building realm. It was unknown if the 2 male cultivators were together, but the 3 female cultivators were obviously disciples of the same sect. Perhaps because the formation outside was already broken, the 5 people who came in didn't look as disheveled as the 4 of them. Among the 5 people, the 2 male cultivators walked in the front while the 3 female cultivators walked behind them. Emo Tienga decided to go in and give it a try. Since the formation outside was easy to break, if there was any danger inside, with the virtual sky mirror in hand, even if she couldn't obtain any benefits, she wouldn't lose her life. Besides, this time, she was going out to gain experience, so she couldn't be too careful. Otherwise, this experience would seem meaningless. After Emo Tienga came out of the virtual sky mirror, she also stepped through the door without any hesitation. Once Emo Tienga entered the stone door, she sensed a fluctuation of Wood's spiritual aura coming from under her feet. Furthermore, the stone floor was moving at a constant speed. Emo Tienga's vision darkened for a moment before it brightened again. She discovered she was inside a domed hall, and under her feet was a circular stone platform floating in the air. Not far from her, there were 4 circular stone platforms floating in the air. One of them was occupied by the Yao couple, Daoist Fangjing, the 2 male cultivators who came later, and the 3 female cultivators from the same sect. The 5 stone platforms were gold, cyan, blue, red, and yellow respectively. They emitted pure spiritual aura of the 5 elements. Emo Tienga was standing on a cyan stone platform. When this stone platform moved until it formed a pentagon with the other 4 stone platforms, it stopped. Shangruan, who was sitting on the red stone platform, looked fine now. Once she saw Emo Tienga standing still, she smiled and said to Emo Tienga, "Little sister, fortunately, you also came in without a hitch." Shangruan knew Yao Zixio harbored malicious intentions towards her, but Shangruan was completely unaware of it and treated her so warmly. In contrast, Emo Tienga actually felt this woman was a bit kinder, so she returned a smile and said, Thank you for your concern, big sister. Once Shang Ruan finished greeting her, she asked in a very natural manner, "What do you think of this hall?" Mo Tiange looked around and answered, "Big sister and the other fellow Daoists came in early. I wonder if you've discovered anything." With a smile, Shang Ruan pointed at the two male cultivators on the yellow stone platform and said, "Fellow Daoist Lu and fellow Daoist Wang said this thing is called a 5 elements platform, but they don't know how to activate it." Upon hearing what she said, Mo Tiange looked at the two male cultivators and asked, "Does this 5 elements platform belong to the category of magic tools or?" The slightly taller of the two male cultivators answered, 5 elements platforms first originated from Tianliang School on Mount Yuzhu in Kunwu mountain range. It has a history of several thousand years. Because Mount Yuzhu has a stone forest structure, the cultivators in that area all live on the stone pillars. The 5 elements platforms were originally built by them for the convenience of the disciples in their school who had low cultivation levels and couldn't fly. However, according to the book, the reason why the 5 elements platforms are called 5 elements platforms is because each stone platform is evolved from a formation. Even if the 5 elements aren't controlled by humans, they can still fly according to a certain pattern on Mount Yuzhu. Although this stone platform's appearance and function are almost the same as the 5 elements platforms in the book, each of them clearly occupies one of the 5 elements. Furthermore, there's nothing else in this hall. It's really beyond what I've seen. The male cultivator standing next to him waited for him to finish speaking, then added, "Ordinary things can only be controlled by 3 kinds of things: divine comprehension, spiritual aura, and primordial blood. However, if you make a mistake, I don't know what will happen." Seeing that the two male cultivators were able to clearly understand the origins of things related to formations, it could be assumed that they were from a sect that specialized in formations. One of the 3 female cultivators from the same sect was the first to reveal a hint of fear. She looked at the stone door that hadn't been closed yet and softly said, "Senior Marshal Sister Yen, we don't know anything about formations, so it's hard for us to judge whether this is right or wrong. How about we leave first?" The other female cultivator frowned and agreed, "Junior Marshal Sister Yun's words are reasonable. Besides, we still haven't finished the task Master gave us, so we shouldn't take any risks." Senior Marshal Sister Yen nodded and said, "Since that's the case, it's more important for us to get down to business." Unexpectedly, just as she finished speaking, the stone platform floated toward the stone door. The 3 of them cried out in surprise. When the stone platform floated to the door, the 3 of them glanced at each other. Senior Marshal Sister Yen said, "How about we think about it together and go back to where we were just now?" The 3 women reached an agreement, and the stone platform actually moved back to its original position. A hint of joy flashed across everyone's faces in the main hall. However, after feeling pleasantly surprised, everyone revealed bitter smiles again. Shangron was the first to show a bitter smile. "Even if we know how to use it, we don't know where we're going." Unexpectedly, Shangron's question, "Where we're going," echoed in the main hall. A white light flashed before everyone's eyes, and they saw 5 large words floating in the middle of the main hall. Mo Tiange's position happened to be opposite to Shangron's, so she could only see the 4 words in reverse. "This life eternal heaven." This life eternal heaven? Mo Tiange only had enough time to think of these words in her divine comprehension before she sensed the stone platform moving quickly. The other stone platforms also acted the same way as this one. They all started to spin rapidly with the center of the main hall as the center. The gales they experienced when they entered the valley were actually swirling upwards from the empty bottom of the main hall. Just as Mo Tiange was about to release her protective aura, she saw a circle of bright blue light erupting from the edge of the stone platform. Right after that, she felt there was nothing under her feet, so she subconsciously summoned the white silk handkerchief. By the time she regained her composure, she realized the main hall had disappeared, the 5 elements platforms had disappeared, and the person who was standing next to her a moment ago had also disappeared. She returned to that valley with green grass and bright sunlight. Under her feet was the white silk handkerchief she usually used to fly. The stone statue in the valley was still the same stone statue, but the entrance was no longer there. On the precipitous mountain wall she saw just now, there were now many stone platforms shaped like entrances. There were many 5 elements platforms flying in the valley, and each 5 elements platform was formed by 5 ring-shaped colors. The trees in the valley weren't as short as before. They were all towering trees, and there were also wooden bridges made of tree vines connecting the trees. Looking at this situation, not only did the spiritual aura in the valley have a bit more spiritual aura, but it also seemed a bit more human. Tiange felt that perhaps in the next moment, a woman wearing a short jacket with a phoenix hairpin and a long skirt would walk out from the stone platform on the precipitous mountain wall. Just as Tiange was thinking about this, a woman dressed like this really walked out from one of the stone platforms in the middle of the mountain wall. That woman stepped on a horsetail whisk and flew towards Tiange at high speed. Tiange was ready to take action, but the woman said, "Fellow Daoist, do you see the 2 junior martial sisters who came with me?" Tiange took a closer look. Although her attire had completely changed, this woman was obviously the woman surnamed Yan from the main hall just now. However, under this attire, she looked even more graceful and charming. Tiange said with astonishment, "Fellow Daoist Yan, why are you dressed like this?" A trace of astonishment flashed across the woman surnamed Yan's face. She said, "Miss, aren't you also dressed like me?" Tiange was about to refute when she felt a chill on her shoulder. She looked down and saw that she, who was still wearing a loose robe with big sleeves, was now wearing a short jacket and a long skirt just like the woman surnamed Yan. However, the woman's attire was the same as the one on the stone platform. It was a brilliant gold color, while Tiange's was a verdant green. Tiange recalled that her attire only changed after the woman surnamed Yan arrived, so she asked, "Fellow Daoist Yan, did you change into this kind of attire right after you arrived here?" The woman surnamed Yan pondered for a moment then answered, "When I arrived here, I was separated from my 2 junior martial sisters. That doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like I only changed into this kind of attire after I walked onto the stone platform." Tiange asked again, "Then, when fellow Daoists saw me, was I already dressed like this?" The woman surnamed Yan wrinkled her brows and answered, "This? I'm not too sure." Tiange's expression couldn't help but change. Divine comprehension could actually play such a big role in this place. After thinking for a moment, she understood what was going on. Obviously, after she saw the stone statue at the entrance, her divine comprehension flashed in her mind, and what she saw in front of her was the same as what she imagined. An illusory formation was also an illusory formation. More than 10 years ago, she and Wei Jiasi experienced an illusion during the demonic beast riot. However, compared to this illusion, that one was simply too crude. Tiange once recalled that if she went to experience that illusion today, she would definitely be able to break it in the first round. However, the illusion in front of her was clearly fake, yet it looked flawless. Upon seeing Tiange's expression suddenly change, the woman surnamed Yan furrowed her brows and asked, "Fellow Daoist, is there something wrong?" Tiange slowly exhaled. While carefully observing her surroundings, she said, "Fellow Daoist, could it be that you haven't noticed that whatever we think about becomes real?" Just as this thought flashed through her mind, a spiritual beast that looked like Xiaohua suddenly appeared on the grass and pounced towards her. Tiange reached out her hand and stroked the head of this Xiaohua. It was smooth to the touch, just like the real thing. Upon hearing what Tiange said, the woman surnamed Yan's expression immediately changed. She pondered for a moment, then made a hand seal, sending a wind blade towards Xiaohua. Unexpectedly, Xiaohua suddenly jumped and rolled away, spewing out an ardent yang real fire. "Ah!" The woman surnamed Yan hastily dodged, but she still shouted at Tiange, "Fellow Daoist, isn't this real?" Tiange shook her hand, and the shuttle of flying Apsara turned into a golden light that surrounded Xiaohua. She then used the soul-refining art and fiercely pressed it down. The second-rank spiritual beast, Xiaohua, immediately let out a whimper and fell to the ground. She stared at Xiaohua's corpse and said slowly, "This is fake." The woman surnamed Yan stared at her in a daze. Just now, she personally tested it. This spiritual beast was indeed a second-rank spiritual beast, But when Immortal attacked, this spiritual beast didn't even have the chance to resist and was killed. Why is it fake? Although it wasn't the real Xiaohua, Immortal still frowned. She turned her head away from the badly mutilated corpse of the spiritual beast and explained to the woman, I didn't bring any spiritual beasts with me on this trip. I was just testing it. Sure enough, as soon as I thought of spiritual beasts, it transformed into my spiritual beast's appearance. Moreover, even its cultivation level was the same. There was only one flaw. When Xiaohua advanced to the second rank, his ardent yang real fire turned into sun real fire, so this fake Xiaohua had the appearance of a real second-rank inferno beast. Upon realizing this, Immortal's brows furrowed again. To be able to do this, it showed that the master of this illusory formation used his own thoughts to set up the formation. However, this also showed a deeper problem. The master of this illusory formation had very profound knowledge. He seemed to be able to transform whatever the person who entered the formation thought of. This point was even more terrifying than the power of the illusory formation itself. The existence of an illusory formation proved that the master's attainments in formations were very high. However, all formations could be cracked. Nevertheless, with his knowledge, this illusory formation had no flaws at all. Moreover, from another perspective, what kind of person could have such profound knowledge? He could actually imitate the things most people thought of without the slightest error, except for some mutated things. This was too terrifying. The more Immortal thought about it, the more she felt that the master of this illusory formation had abilities beyond her imagination. In the end, her forehead was already covered in fine beads of sweat. Although the woman surnamed Yen heard Immortal's explanation, she didn't understand why Immortal had such a reaction and was full of doubts. However, the fact that Immortal easily killed a second-rank spiritual beast just now made her realize that Immortal's strength was a bit higher than that of ordinary middle-stage foundation-building cultivators. She couldn't help but feel a hint of reverence towards Immortal. Little sister Yen Ruoshu from Bishuan Court. May I ask big sister's name and which group you're from? At first, she only called Immortal Miss or fellow Daoist, but now she called her little sister and called her big sister on purpose. Immortal just said faintly, I'm Yishan. My master is nameless. Presumably, fellow Daoist also doesn't know me. Immortal's indifferent tone and her unwillingness to say her master's name made the woman named Yen Ruoshu rather angry. However, when she thought about the current situation, Immortal's expression remained calm, so she swallowed her anger. Big sister Yi, what's going on? It should be an illusory formation. Immortal lowered her head to look at herself. She closed her eyes to think. When she opened her eyes again, sure enough, her clothes had returned to their original appearance. Illusory array? Yen Ruoshu turned her head to take a look. The flowers, the trees, the spirit beasts, and the birds were all real. She couldn't help but feel afraid. What should we do? There's nothing I can do for now. Immortal took out the white silk handkerchief and the shuttle of flying Apsara and prepared herself to face the enemy. She then turned her head and said, Let's go. We'll look for other people first. If we can find them, we'll think about our next step. All right. Yen Ruoshu had no choice but to nod her head helplessly. After walking for a while, Yen Ruoshu asked, Big sister Yi, did you also come here to work in the secular world? While walking, Immortal attentively observed her surroundings. When she heard Yen Ruoshu's voice, she hastily answered. Yen Ruoshu continued, That's truly a coincidence. We 3 senior sisters and junior sisters were ordered by Master to come to the mortal world to handle some matters, and we just happened to notice spirit energy escaping from here, so we came over to take a look. Sister Yi, what do you want to do? If it's a coincidence, can you come with us? This woman was indeed a bit noisy. Immortal wrinkled her brows and said, I left the mountain to travel under my master's orders, so I'm not sure where I'm going. Ah, then how about Sister Yi come with us? We are both women, so we must have a lot of common topics. Big Sister Yi. Immortal frowned inwardly as this woman kept talking about Bishuan Court. Mo Tiange knew what kind of cultivation group Yan Ruoshu was talking about was Bishuan Court. Reportedly, this cultivation group only accepted women. It was built in an extremely secretive place and rarely had any contact with the outside world. It was a relatively mysterious cultivation group. The power of this cultivation group wasn't big nor small. Its scale was roughly the same as Yunwu sect or Zixia sect in the past. However, this Yan Ruoshu was very indifferent towards Mo Tiange before, but now she was a lot more enthusiastic. Obviously, she was alone in this place. Seeing that Mo Tiange's cultivation level was higher than hers, she wanted to befriend Mo Tiange. In fact, they were alone now. Mo Tiange never had the habit of leaving her companions behind, so if there was any danger, Mo Tiange would naturally protect her. This Yan Ruoshu basically didn't need to be like this. Fellow Daoist Yan, do you have a way to contact your 2 junior martial sisters? Mo Tiange interrupted Yan Ruoshu. Yan Ruoshu paused for a moment then nodded. We have a sect summoning talisman. The so-called sect summoning talisman was a method for disciples of the same cultivation group to communicate with each other. This talisman was different from a personal summoning talisman. It used a special method. Once it was sent out, all the disciples of the same cultivation group within a certain range would receive it. Mo Tiange also had several sect summoning talismans in her hands. Every disciple of a cultivation group could receive them when they left the mountain. However, it wasn't easy to make these talismans, so it was best not to use them unless it was an emergency. Upon hearing what Yan Ruoshu said, Mo Tiange said, in that case, fellow Daoist Yan, you should try to use the sect summoning talisman. It's really hard to find people blindly like this. Chapter 159. Yan Ruoshu sent a summoning talisman to the group. The talisman flew into the air, circled once, then fell back into Yan Ruoshu's hand. Yan Ruoshu was at a loss. Mo Tiange frowned and said, forget it. It seems even summoning talismans don't work in this illusory formation. Since it was an illusory formation, it naturally had its limitations. What should she do now? If the whole valley was an illusory formation, where was the exit? This valley was surrounded by cliffs, but the sky. Mo Tiange raised her head to look at the sky but still shook her head. Even if foundation building cultivators could fly, the sky was probably within the range of the illusory formation. The 2 of them circled the valley but didn't find anyone else, so they returned to the stone statue and sat on the altar. Yan Ruoshu saw that Mo Tiange was still calm despite being surrounded, so she unconsciously relied on her. In order to relieve her tension, she kept talking to Mo Tiange. As it turned out, the 3 female cultivators from Bishuan Court came here together with her, but they fell behind because she sped up. About an hour after Mo Tiange and Daoist Fangjing entered the valley, Yan Ruoshu's group of 5 also met the 2 male cultivators surnamed Lu and Wang on the cliff. They were also cultivators from the same group. They learned from the aura refining cultivators on the cliff that there were already 4 foundation building cultivators going down the valley together. They also learned that there were gales, miasma, and other things in the valley, so the 5 of them went down together. Unlike Mo Tiange's group, these 5 people laid a formation to resist the gales according to the instructions of the 2 male cultivators. However, how could this kind of formation, which was laid according to position, compare to Mo Tiange's white silk handkerchief? They only went about 300 meters down, but they already felt it was difficult to resist. At that moment, for some reason, the gales suddenly weakened, so they could go down the valley smoothly. As soon as they entered the valley, they discovered that it was completely different from the dangerous gales and miasma high up in the sky. It was quiet and beautiful like a paradise. After searching for a while, they finally found this stone statue. When Mo Tiange heard this, she roughly understood what happened. After they were swept down by the gales, she didn't lose consciousness for long. Later, they found the stone statue and broke the formation, so the gales weakened and the 5 of them were able to reach the bottom of the valley smoothly. After understanding what happened, Mo Tiange felt even more puzzled. After thousands of years, the formation had long since lost its original might, which was why she was able to break it so easily. However, She had never imagined that the formation could actually affect the astral winds in the valley. If that was the case, wouldn't the might of the formation be much stronger than she had imagined? The hidden little spirit vein, the formation of the altar, the mysterious 5 elements platform, and this illusory formation that he knew was fake but couldn't see through, the master of this place was really terrifying. In addition, this valley was clearly as beautiful as a fairyland, but the air was filled with miasma and astral winds, as if it was deliberately not letting outsiders know. Putting all these together, it sounded like some kind of expert was living here in seclusion. However, what about the stone statue and the altar? The two appeared in the same place, which was like worshipping gods in the mortal world, but there were traces of immortal cultivators everywhere. Could it be that there were mortals in this valley who worshipped the immortal cultivators who lived here as gods? She thought of several possibilities in her mind, but Yen Ruoshu was still jabbering on and on. Mo Tiange was annoyed by her, so she stood up and said, "Fellow Daoist Yen." Yen Ruoshu was stunned. "Let's split up and search. If we run into other people, we'll meet here." Yen Ruoshu was at a loss. She was indeed a bit scared to be alone. Mo Tiange's heart softened when she saw a trace of fear flashing across her face, but also embarrassed to say it out loud. She found this person too weak and displeasing to the eye, but she was actually just a timid woman who didn't have any bad intentions. Mo Tiange softened her tone and said, "If it's inconvenient for fellow Daoist, you can wait for me here. I'll be back soon." Yen Ruoshu nodded gratefully. "Okay, big sister Yi, you have to be careful." Mo Tiange gave her a smile, then she controlled the white silk handkerchief and flew up. When she was with Yen Ruoshu just now, they only roughly searched the entire valley. This time, without Yen Ruoshu chattering on the side, Mo Tiange carefully searched the stone platforms one by one. The location of the stone statue in the T-shaped valley happened to be in the bottommost hook. There was also a long valley path that was horizontal and vertical. There were too many trees and their branches were too lush, making it inconvenient to fly. Mo Tiange simply got off the white silk handkerchief and walked along the vine bridge. If she ran into a 5 elements platform, she would be directly taken to the next point. Maybe those people also did the same. She might be able to find 1 or 2 by chance this way. As she walked on the vine bridge and among the trees, she heard the chirping of insects, the singing of birds, and the frolicking of spiritual beasts. Mo Tiange suddenly had a feeling that living in seclusion for the rest of her life in such a paradise was also good. But this thought only flashed in her mind for a moment before she immediately swept it out of her mind. She had a virtual sky world. Wasn't it also a paradise inside? What was there to be envious about? If she let this thought go, she was afraid she really wouldn't be able to get out of this illusory formation for the rest of her life. After walking for a while, she suddenly sensed a faint spiritual aura fluctuation with her divine sense. Mo Tiange's spirit was aroused. She couldn't care about anything else. She alternated between the vine bridge and the 5 elements platforms, rushing towards the spiritual aura fluctuation. The spiritual aura fluctuation became clearer and clearer. She clearly felt that 3 cultivators were fighting. One of them had a somewhat familiar spiritual aura. Mo Tiange stepped onto another 5 elements platform. She turned a corner and saw it. It was the 2 male cultivators Lu and Wang, and Daoist Fangjing. She didn't know what was going on, but the 3 of them were actually fighting recklessly with bloodshot eyes. The other strange thing was that although the 2 male cultivators Lu and Wang were fighting together against Daoist Fangjing, they would trip each other up from time to time. It was simply a 3-way fight. If she only met them on the road, Mo Tiange wouldn't have paid any attention to them. Even if the 3 of them died together, it wouldn't have mattered to her. But now, they encountered the illusory formation in this valley together, and each of them was standing on one of the 5 colored stone platforms. Who knew if something bad would happen if one of them died? With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange summoned the white silk handkerchief. As she flew towards them, she shouted, "Stop!" The 3 people looked at her at the same time, but all of them suddenly changed direction and started to attack her with magic tools and spells. Daoist Fangjing shouted, "Fellow Daoist Yi, don't get involved. I found this thing first. Mo Tiange was stunned. She didn't have time to think about the meaning of his words because the attacks from the three people's magic tools had already arrived. She raised her hand, causing a brick wall to fall and completely block the three people's attacks. At the same time, she used the shuttle of flying Apsara and the soul-refining art to release its spiritual aura pressure. The three people immediately felt their heads go numb and their movements were a step slower. Each of them was surrounded by the golden rays formed by the shuttle of flying Apsara. Nevertheless, these three people weren't mediocre. Among the 9 people trapped in this valley, 5 of them were in the early stage of the foundation-building realm, while the 4 of them were in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. Mo Tiange wasn't afraid of facing 3 middle-stage foundation-building cultivators at the same time. But even if she wasn't afraid, it was still very difficult for her. She borrowed the spiritual aura pressure from the second layer of the soul-refining art to seize the initiative and split the shuttle of flying Apsara into 3, trapping the 3 people at the same time. In the next moment, the 3 of them reacted and each used their own methods. Daoist Fangjing used a horsetail whisk. Although it wasn't a high-grade magic tool, it had a lot of experience. Among the 2 male cultivators surnamed Lu and Wang, one used a sword while the other was a talisman cultivator. When the 3 of them attacked her at the same time, even though Mo Tiange's magic tool was powerful, she still found herself in danger. At that moment, the benefits of comparing notes with Yi Jingwen all day long previously showed themselves. Yi Jingwen was a sword cultivator, and his fighting techniques were also superior to cultivators in the same realm as him. He had a move called Thousand Directions Broken Light Sword, which was extremely powerful. When he released several hundred sword auras to attack the enemy at the same time, it was no different from fighting several cultivators at the same time. Now that she saw the 3 people attacking her at the same time, Mo Tiange, who had already prepared her soul-refining art, instantly released her spiritual aura pressure. The shuttle of flying Apsara closed and she once again attacked the talisman cultivator surnamed Wang. At the same time, she also summoned the enchanting lantern and firmly blocked their attacks with the white silk handkerchief. Several methods were launched at the same time, and there were practically no pauses in between. This was the result of comparing notes with Yi Jingwen. The faster she attacked and the more methods she had, the higher her chances of winning were. The enchanting lantern shone brightly, the shuttle of flying Apsara laid a formation, and the soul-refining art suppressed them. For a moment, the 3 people were suppressed by her and stopped for a moment. Mo Tiange shouted, "Wake up! This is an illusory formation." Right after she said that, and their divine senses were suppressed by the soul-refining art, the 3 people were stunned for a moment before they somewhat sobered up. Mo Tiange seized this opportunity and shouted, "Whatever you think will appear here. You mustn't fall into the trap." The 3 people finally stopped. Daoist Fangjing's expression was filled with doubt. "It's fake." Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief. "Correct. What did you see just now? Each of you should think about something else." The 3 people were skeptical, so they turned around to look behind them. Only then did Mo Tiange notice that there was a snow-white flower growing on the rock wall. It was surrounded by immortal aura, and it looked like a fairy descending to the world. She suddenly understood. This was the white jade snow lotus, a rare species passed down from the distant past era. It could be concocted into a kind of medicinal pill called Heavenly Fragrance Pill. This pill could help people break through bottlenecks, and it was also effective for nascent soul cultivators. It was no wonder the 3 of them fought over it. However, there were several stalks in her virtual sky world, and they were much older than this one, so there was no need for her to be jealous. In fact, the 3 people had been observing her. If she saw this thing and was tempted, they would kill her immediately. However, when Mo Tiange saw the white jade snow lotus, she only showed a look of realization on her face before she regained her calmness. Only then did the 3 of them listen to her and try to think about other things. All of a sudden, the white jade snow lotus turned into green smoke and disappeared into the air. What appeared in that place was a spiritual plant enshrouded in purple aura. It swayed in the wind and was surrounded by spiritual aura. Purple slew grass. The three people's expressions changed greatly. They looked at each other and remained silent. Mo Tiange knew they believed her, so she heaved a sigh of relief. She put away her magic weapons and tools, then walked towards them. You saw it. In here, whatever you think in your heart will directly appear in front of you. Spiritual plants and exotic flowers? They're all fake. Daoist Fangjing's face alternated between red and white. In the end, he heaved a long sigh and said, "It seems I was too impatient. In that case, I have to thank the master of this place. If it weren't for this illusory formation, I also wouldn't have realized I almost had an inner demon." Based on what he said, it seemed the person who imagined the white jade snow lotus here was Daoist Fangjing. But of course, he wasn't young and he didn't have a cultivation group to rely on, so he must be the most anxious. Medicinal pills concocted from white jade snow lotus could help people break through bottlenecks, so it must be what he needed the most right now. Therefore, as soon as he arrived here, he hoped to find this kind of miraculous medicine. When the two cultivators Lu and Wang heard what Daoist Fangjing said, they also looked ashamed. Not only did they believe her, but they also had a falling out with their fellow disciples because of it. Even if the two of them didn't mention it, there was already a grudge in their hearts. Daoist Fangjing cupped his hands towards Mo Tiange, then said sincerely, "Fellow Daoist Yi, thank you very much for this time." Mo Tiange nodded to accept his bow, then asked, "Fellow Daoist Fangjing, fellow Daoist Lu, fellow Daoist Wang, how did you get here?" The one who answered was still Daoist Fangjing. "After I disappeared from the 5 Elements platforms, I found myself not too far from here. I slowly walked here until I found the white jade snow lotus. Just as I was about to pick it, these two fellow Daoists rushed out." He cast a glance at the two cultivators Lu and Wang. Although he maintained his politeness, there was a hint of disdain in his gaze. Obviously, when the two cultivators Lu and Wang saw the lotus, they also wanted to take it for themselves and had a falling out with their fellow disciples. Mo Tiange wasn't interested in investigating this. She swept her gaze over the two cultivators Lu and Wang, then asked, "Have you seen anyone else?" The three of them shook their heads. Daoist Fangjing asked, "Then what about fellow Daoist Yi? What did you experience on this trip?" Mo Tiange said, "I was transported to the stone statue and I met fellow Daoist Yen. But fellow Daoist Yen was separated from her 2 junior martial sisters, and I also didn't see fellow Daoist Yao and his wife." "Then how did fellow Daoist Yi know this place was an illusory formation? Could it be that you also encountered something?" It was the cultivator surnamed Lu who interrupted. There was a suspicious look in his eyes. Obviously, he thought they also encountered something similar. Mo Tiange said faintly, "When fellow Daoist Yen and I met and discovered we were wearing the same clothes from that stone statue, I knew something was amiss. Sure enough, when I tried, I confirmed this place was undoubtedly an illusory formation." This answer surprised the two cultivators Lu and Wang, but since they saw her methods just now, they didn't dare to say anything. This little girl looked gentle, but her attacks were really terrifying. Her movements were as fast as wind and thunder, and her magic weapon was powerful. Although she was also in the middle stage of the foundation building realm like them, she dared to fight against the 3 of them alone without showing any signs of losing. They originally thought they were cultivators from cultivation groups, so they looked down on this group of cultivators from the secular world. They thought this female cultivator was an individual cultivator like the Yao couple and Daoist Fangjing. They never expected her to be so powerful. Right now, they were certain Mo Tiange was undoubtedly a cultivator from a cultivation group. "Fellow Daoist Yi, what should we do now?" The 3 of them almost killed each other. Fortunately, Mo Tiange reminded them, so Daoist Fangjing was now very polite. Mo Tiange thought for a while, then said, "We'd better find the others first. We're each standing on one of the 5 Elements platforms. We don't know what will happen to the others if they don't pass the test. If something happens to them and we get implicated because of it, things won't be good." The 3 of them thought about it and agreed. They each stood on one of the 5 Elements platforms, so they might have already been recognized as one. What if one of them didn't pass the illusory formation and this formation turned into a killing formation? If they lost their lives just like that, it would be too unjust. Fellow Daoist is right. Daoist Fangjing was the first to agree. Lu and Wang looked at each other and nodded. Shall we go look for them first? Let's split up and search. Tiange said, it'll be faster to find them this way. Fellow Daoist Yen and I agreed to meet at the stone statue. After we find them, we'll go to the stone statue. Just in case. How about we split into groups of 2? It's easy to fall into the trap if you're alone, so it's good to have someone on the side to remind you, Daoist Fangjing suggested. Lu and Wang hesitated for a moment but didn't say anything. They had just fought, and it was obvious that there was a grudge between them. However, in this unfamiliar environment, they could still trust each other a little. That's settled then. Tiange spoke first. Fellow Daoist Lu, fellow Daoist Wang, you two are fellow apprentices, so you'll naturally be together. How about I go with fellow Daoist Fangjing? How could Lu and Wang not agree? They nodded, and the 4 of them split into groups of 2. Tiange felt a bit more relaxed now that she was searching with Daoist Fangjing. Daoist Fangjing was an old cultivator who had been in the cultivation world for a long time. He wasn't a chatterbox like Yen Ruoshu, and he was even more experienced than her in handling matters. The 2 of them quickly searched their way. The place where Daoist Fangjing and the 2 cultivators Lu and Wang fought was at the T-shaped intersection. Since Tiange came from the stone statue, they were divided into 2 teams, so they naturally went in opposite directions and searched for the 2 sides of the T-shaped intersection. Fellow Daoist, Daoist Fangjing suddenly shouted from the stone platform on the other side. Tiange turned around and saw Daoist Fangjing, who was on the other 5 elements platform, waving at her then pointing in a direction. She closed her eyes and released her divine sense. Sure enough, she found subtle spiritual aura fluctuations. She couldn't help but admire Daoist Fangjing's divine sense. Before entering the valley, she already knew he must have practiced a spell to strengthen his divine sense, but she didn't expect it to be so strong. She overlooked it, but Daoist Fangjing sensed it. Apparently, the saying, "old ginger is spicier," was indeed true. Even though his cultivation level was a bit lower than hers, this Daoist Fangjing really couldn't be underestimated. The 2 of them chased after him using the spiritual aura fluctuations. Before long, they heard fighting noises. It was Yen Ruoshu's 2 junior martial sisters. Tiange was rather flabbergasted. It wasn't a big deal when it came to the 2 cultivators Lu and Wang. Male cultivators valued worldly possessions, and their characters were also more aggressive. When they came across treasures, it was very likely that they would fight each other even if they were from the same cultivation group. However, these 2 were female cultivators. Female cultivators rarely fought each other when they ran into trouble, not to mention they were martial sisters from the same cultivation group. Daoist Fangjing was also astonished. The 2 of them slowly flew over. Sure enough, the 2 female cultivators from Bishuan Court were fighting each other. Moreover, judging from the way they fought, they didn't seem to be holding back at all. In the middle of the fight, one of the female cultivators dressed in black shouted loudly, "You still dare to attack me!" The other female cultivator dressed in yellow, whom Tiange remembered was called Junior Martial Sister Yun, by the female cultivator dressed in black, withdrew her jade bracelet magic tool, then uttered a cold, "Mph. Senior Martial Sister Lu, it was you who attacked first." You, the female cultivator called Senior Martial Sister Lu, had a twisted expression, and her face was filled with resentment. "Fellow Daoist Daoist Fangjing stopped and said softly, "Look over there." Tiange looked in the direction Daoist Fangjing was pointing. Not far from the 2 female cultivators stood a white-robed man. He was very handsome, elegant, and suave. Tiange sensed spiritual aura fluctuations coming from his body. His cultivation level was in the early stage of the foundation building realm. She muttered to herself, "This isn't a real person, right?" Daoist Fangjing frowned, then slowly shook his head. "In my opinion, he shouldn't be." Tiange already knew second-rank spiritual beasts could be created inside this illusory formation, so presumably, creating an early-stage foundation-building cultivator shouldn't be a problem, right? Since this person appeared where the two women were fighting, he was most likely the reason for their conflict. Alas, it's another emotional entanglement. For female cultivators, feelings were indeed more important than treasures. At that moment, Junior Martial Sister Yun leaned towards the white-robed male cultivator and said in a sweet voice, "Big Brother Tang, look at Senior Martial Sister Lu." Before she could finish, Senior Martial Sister Lu whipped her magic tool whip and said angrily, "Yun Hanyan, don't go too far. Pretending to be weak and pitiful, what else can you do besides this trick? You're slandering me for hitting you. It's obviously you who insulted me, so I—" The woman called Yun Hanyan only glanced at her, then turned to talk to the male cultivator again. "Big Brother Tang, I'm not that kind of person. You know Yun Hanyan." Senior Martial Sister Lu couldn't help but shout angrily when she heard Yun Hanyan wiping her tears again. She didn't say anything else and lashed her whip again. The two women started fighting again. Mo Tiange couldn't help but rub the space between her eyebrows. Didn't these two people realize something was wrong with their Big Brother Tang? They were jealous of this man, but they couldn't even tell whether he was real or fake. Spiritual beasts and the like could be imitated, but humans were too complicated. Even if they could be imitated, the details would always be different. Since they were lovers, they would naturally be able to tell the difference. Daoist Fangjing flew towards them and shouted loudly, "Fellow Daoists." His arrival finally made the two women stop fighting for a moment, but they still glared at each other with hatred and only paid a little attention to Daoist Fangjing. In the end, Senior Martial Sister Lu still remembered the matter at hand. She asked, "Fellow Daoist, is something the matter?" Daoist Fangjing was annoyed that these two people didn't know what was important. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and threw his magic tool towards the white-robed male cultivator. The two women turned pale with fright. The two people who were fighting just now attacked Daoist Fangjing together. At that moment, Mo Tiange arrived. She waved her white silk handkerchief, blocking the two women's magic tools, allowing Daoist Fangjing to attack the white-robed male cultivator smoothly. Under Daoist Fangjing's attack, the white-robed male cultivator retreated all of a sudden. He then took out a flying sword and attacked Daoist Fangjing. Daoist Fangjing never expected that a fake illusion would be able to retreat and counterattack. He was stunned for a moment and his reaction was a step too slow. The flying sword brushed past him and cut half of his sleeve. Daoist Fangjing was astonished as he held the half of his sleeve. Mo Tiange shouted, "Fellow Daoist Fangjing, that illusion has the strength of a real person. You must be careful." Daoist Fangjing regained his senses and immediately dodged to the side. He then raised his hand and used magic to fight with the white-robed male cultivator. Under normal circumstances, individual cultivators couldn't compare to cultivators from cultivation groups or cultivation clans because they lacked magic tools, spiritual talismans, spirit stones, and the like. They also didn't have good cultivation techniques, so they were at a disadvantage in fights of magical power. However, outstanding individual cultivators weren't inferior to cultivators from cultivation groups. Because their path to immortality was extremely difficult, they had perseverance and patience that surpassed ordinary people, and they were battle-hardened. Those who could reach the end and stand above everyone else were people with excellent wisdom and tyrannical spells. Although Daoist Fangjing couldn't be said to have excellent wisdom, he had roamed the cultivation world for several hundred years. Being able to reach the middle stage of the foundation-building realm and still live well proved that he surpassed other people in certain aspects. The fact that he could hold on for such a long time while fighting against Lu and Wang proved that he had some clues. This white-robed male cultivator was only in the early stage of the foundation-building realm, so his cultivation level was slightly lower than Daoist Fangjing's. Furthermore, he was an illusion. Although the illusory formation made him look like a real person, he lacked the flexibility and versatility of a real person in fights of magical power. Once he was tangled with Daoist Fangjing, it only took him a moment to show signs of defeat. Yun Hanyan and Senior Martial Sister Lu were on tenterhooks when they saw Big Brother Tang in danger again and again. However, they were blocked by Xianxia and couldn't go forward, so the two of them were furious. They glanced at each other, then simultaneously attacked Xianxia. When Xianxia saw that one of them took out several magic tools and the other threw out a large number of talismans, looking as if they wanted to fight her to the death, she was also annoyed. She wanted to teach them a lesson, so she didn't show any mercy. The shuttle of flying Apsara and the white silk handkerchief both attacked and defended, resolving this move. In a flash, Xianxia released the spiritual aura pressure of the soul-refining art, causing the two women to freeze. Xianxia didn't show any mercy. The golden rays from the shuttle of flying Apsara split into 2 and then 4. Each ray attacked the two women separately. The golden rays were aggressive and their momentum was monstrous. Coupled with the fact that Xianxia was suppressing them with the spiritual aura pressure of the soul-refining art, the two women no longer had the strength to fight back. They could only watch helplessly as the golden rays pierced their bodies. Two cries of alarm rang out at the same time. Xianxia put away her magic weapons and magic tools, then landed on the ground. She stared coldly at the two women. Also came from the other side. Daoist Fangjing had killed the illusion of the white-robed male cultivator. When the two women heard that sound, they simultaneously turned their heads and shouted, "Big Brother Tang!" Regardless of their injuries, they crawled up and staggered towards the white-robed male cultivator. They threw themselves on his body. Once they saw that he was no longer breathing, they burst into tears. Xianxia and Daoist Fangjing glanced at each other. Both of them frowned. Daoist Fangjing was used to worldly affairs, so he couldn't stand this kind of ignorant cultivation group disciples. Xianxia was also unhappy that the two women still hadn't realized something was wrong. Lu. After crying, senior martial sister Lu crawled up with a tear-stained face. A ruthless expression appeared on her face. "I'll fight you to the death." Xianxia was furious. She let out a cold, then raised her hand and pressed down. The golden rays she held back just now burst out of their bodies. The two women cried out and fell to the ground. Their shoulders were injured. "Why don't you think about why your big brother Tang is here?" Xianxia shouted. "You can't even distinguish an illusion. If I knew this would happen, I would have let you kill each other." The two women were stunned to hear what she said. Their tears hadn't dried yet as they stared at her blankly. "Illusion?" Senior martial sister Lu asked in a hoarse voice. Xianxia was very angry. She turned her head away, not wanting to talk to them. Daoist Fangjing could only step forward and explain. "Fellow Daoists, think carefully. How did your senior martial brother come here?" The two women were stunned. They glanced at each other, then Yun Hanyan said with uncertainty, Senior martial sister Lu and I walked here. While we were talking, we saw Big Brother Tang walking towards us." "Then how did you talk to your Big Brother Tang?" The two women were silent. After a while, senior martial sister Lu finally answered, "We quarreled as soon as we saw Big Brother Tang." "So that's what happened." These two women, Daoist Fangjing also couldn't bear it anymore. He furrowed his brows and continued to say, "Calm down and think about it. You've been fighting like this. Would your big brother Tang say nothing?" The two women were silent at the same time. The mournful expressions on their faces finally disappeared. Because they quarreled as soon as they saw Big Brother Tang, they didn't have time to recall how Big Brother Tang should react. Therefore, this illusion didn't say anything and only stood there in a daze. The hateful thing was, these two women still couldn't tell it apart. "Enough," Xianxia said coldly. "Wipe your tears, treat your wounds, and follow us." Chapter 160. Yun and Lu weren't seriously injured. Seeing how Xianxia and Daoist Fangjing spoke to them harshly and didn't conceal their disgust, they didn't dare to say anything. After all, it was a fact that their cultivation levels were higher than theirs. Moreover, they just witnessed their fighting strength. They were both female cultivators who weren't good at fights of magical powers. If they fought, any one of them would be enough to kill them. At that moment, the two of them obediently bandaged their wounds and left with Xianxia and Daoist Fangjing without saying a word. Although Emo Tienga wanted to teach them a lesson, she didn't hurt their vital parts. After casting a simple healing spell, Yun and Lu's injuries weren't serious. After watching such a farce, the group of 4 silently searched the rest of the way. As expected, they didn't find anything, so they rushed back to the stone statue. They walked to the bottom of the valley and turned a corner. The stone statue was right in front of them, but Emo Tienga was stunned. The altar was empty, and there was no one around it. Yen Ruoshu wasn't there. Emo Tienga was powerless now. Although she didn't deny that female cultivators generally had lower fighting strength than male cultivators because of their personalities, most of the female cultivators she'd met weren't inferior to male cultivators. Aside from Lord Daoist Jinghe's maids with high standards, Yumu Sek's Wang Qianyi and Murong Yen, Shenqing School's Luo Fengxue, Han Qingyu, and the others all had methods and temperaments that weren't inferior to male cultivators, so they never dragged others down. The 3 Bichuan court female cultivators she ran into really annoyed her. One was cowardly and the other 2 were jealous. Could it be that there were only female cultivators in the group and no male cultivators to compare them with, so they just let themselves be and didn't strive to improve themselves? Emo Tienga's expression darkened. I told fellow Daoist Yen we'd meet here, but I don't know where she went. Daoist Fangjing's expression also darkened. He was an individual cultivator, so he became even more furious when he saw how useless the group's disciples were. How much effort and how many hardships did individual cultivators have to go through to reach the foundation-building realm? These groups' disciples had masters to teach them and were worshipped by the group, yet they were actually so disappointing. Let's just wait here. If we get separated again, it'll be troublesome, Daoist Fangjing said. We can't keep searching like this. If we lose someone else. After Daoist Fangjing said that, he didn't continue speaking. Emo Tienga already understood what he meant. They weren't these women's masters or relatives, so she couldn't take care of them right now. It would be better to just let them fend for themselves. Although this meaning was cruel, it was also the reality. If she had the strength to spare, Emo Tienga wouldn't mind lending a helping hand. However, she also couldn't make heads or tails of this illusory formation in front of her. It would be best if she didn't get killed by them. As an individual cultivator, Daoist Fangjing was able to smoothly live until he reached the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. When he needed to be ruthless, he would never be soft-hearted. Now that he saw that Emo Tienga was silent, he knew she had acquiesced, so his worried heart relaxed a little. Daoist Fangjing already saw Emo Tienga's strength during the fight just now. If he wanted to leave this place alive, he naturally hoped he could join hands with her. At that moment, however, the 2 cultivators Yun and Lu couldn't hear anything. Seeing their ignorant expressions, Emo Tienga felt pity and hatred in her heart. She steeled her heart and pretended she didn't see anything. Although she had the virtual sky world, they were now inside someone else's illusory formation. Even if they entered the virtual sky world, they would still be frustrated if they couldn't leave. Therefore, the most important thing right now was to leave this illusory formation safely. She didn't need to be responsible for other people's lives. The 4 of them waited on the stone statue altar for a while. The 2 cultivators Lu and Wang finally came back. When Emo Tienga sensed them with her divine sense, she deliberately paid attention to them. She realized there were only the 2 of them and there was no trace of Yao Zixio or Shang Ruan. She felt both lucky and disappointed. She was lucky that the 2 of them came back safely. She was disappointed because she had a good impression of Shang Ruan, so she couldn't help but feel sad if Shang Ruan disappeared just like that. The 2 cultivators Lu and Wang arrived. They glanced around and asked, "What about the Yao couple and Miss Yen?" Daoist Fangjing fought with the 2 of them, so he didn't want to pay attention to them right now. Emo Tienga answered, "We also didn't find the Yao couple. Fellow Daoist Yen was originally here, but she disappeared when we came back. We don't know where she went." The 2 cultivators Lu and Wang glanced at each other and said anxiously, "Then what should we do? If something happened to them, will we also be implicated?" "I don't know," Emo Tienga said faintly. "We've searched the whole valley. If fellow Daoists have any ideas, you can bring them up and give it a try." On the 5-colored 5 elements platform, The two cultivators Lu and Wang already showed they were proficient in formations. In fact, Immortal came from a learned family and had access to ancient books in the virtual sky world, so her knowledge about formations was naturally richer than theirs. It was just that she deliberately hid her skills and didn't want to talk about it. The two cultivators Lu and Wang were startled by what she said. Soon after, they went to the side and started to discuss. Immortal listened to their discussion. These two cultivators' attainments in formations weren't bad, but this illusory formation was too real. Their methods might be useless. She then sat on the side in silence and pondered by herself. All formations needed the support of external spiritual aura. The formation on the altar in the real valley was easily broken by her because it had been too long and its spiritual aura had declined. This illusory formation could create second-rank demonic beasts, foundation-building cultivators, and thousand-year-old spiritual plants brimming with spiritual aura. The amount of spiritual aura it used must have been enormous. That was strange. Why could this formation still display such power even though it had existed for so long? The amount of spiritual aura it needed to trap them in this place and create those things brimming with spiritual aura was really frightening. It definitely couldn't be achieved by using hundreds or even thousands of spirit stones. The spirit stones used to create such an exquisite formation must have been of a high grade. Spirit stones were also divided into grades. Ordinary spirit stones whose grades weren't mentioned were all low-grade spirit stones. In addition, there were middle-grade spirit stones and high-grade spirit stones. Middle-grade and high-grade spirit stones were very rare in the cultivation world. Cultivators after the core formation realm usually couldn't obtain them. Because Immortal was Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple, she received some middle-grade and high-grade spirit stones as a disciple. But even if she had them, she usually only used low-grade spirit stones. Middle-grade and high-grade spirit stones were reserved for laying high-level formations. The higher the level of a formation, the higher the concentration of spiritual aura it needed. Once the concentration of spiritual aura reached a certain level, it couldn't be increased just by increasing the number of spirit stones. She had to use middle-grade and high-grade spirit stones. Since the spiritual aura this formation needed was so frightening, Immortal roughly guessed the number of high-grade spirit stones needed was probably more than 1,000 or even 10,000. 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. Immortal thought about it and felt it was terrifying. Because she was Lord Daoist Jinghe's advanced inner disciple, her disciples' rations were only a bit less than core formation cultivators, but it was several times more than ordinary foundation-building cultivators and even elite disciples. However, she only received about 10 middle-grade and high-grade spirit stones every year. If she didn't advance, it would take her more than 1,000 years to save up 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. She was in charge of all the affairs in Xianxia Palace. Lord Daoist Jinghe only received about 100 high-grade spirit stones every year. Even so, it would take him several decades or even 100 years to save up 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. If the consumption of cultivating, laying formations, and so on were taken into account, her cheap master's net worth was probably only this much, right? What was the identity of the master of this place? Her master was a nascent soul cultivator from one of the top cultivation groups in the celestial pole. Even among nascent soul cultivators, his net worth was considered rich, but he probably wouldn't use 10,000 high-grade spirit stones to lay a formation. Could it be a cultivator in the nascent soul realm or above? This thought only flashed in Immortal's mind, but she soon shook her head. She had seen Zhong Muling and Yuan Bao. Judging from the illusory sky formation, this formation was a lot worse and didn't seem to be the work of a deification cultivator. Besides, how could a deification cultivator be so easy to find? According to Yuan Bao, the world was so big and the celestial pole was only a corner. There were more than 10 places like the celestial pole, and it would take several thousand years for a deification cultivator to appear. How could she be so lucky as to casually enter a deification cultivator's immortal's cave? She shook her head and continued to think about how to crack the formation. Spiritual or right? Such a huge illusory formation definitely couldn't exist for a long time. Even if she couldn't crack it, it would be good if it could last for several months. A happy expression appeared on her face, but a moment later, her smile froze. She only thought that an illusory formation would certainly consume a lot of spiritual aura, but she never thought that an illusory formation might make people feel wronged. One day might turn into a year. If that was the case, perhaps being trapped here for several months would turn into several hundred years, and they wouldn't be able to leave for several hundred years. However, they also couldn't really cultivate for several hundred years. In the end, they might go crazy, right? Thinking up to this point, Imotienga still couldn't find an answer, so she sighed. Daoist Fangjing noticed her expression, so he walked towards her and asked, "Fellow Daoist Yi, what's wrong?" Imotienga shook her head. "It's nothing. I just can't think of a way to crack it." She turned around and saw that the two cultivators Lu and Wang were also shaking their heads and sighing. Obviously, they also couldn't think of a way to crack it. As for the two Bichuan court female disciples, upon seeing their cautious expressions, they finally realized what kind of dangerous situation they were in, so they were no longer in the mood to quarrel. Instead, they just huddled together with fear on their faces. The 6 of them were at their wits' end. They sat on the stone statue's altar for a whole day and watched the sky turn dark, but they still couldn't come up with a solution. There was also no trace of the Yao couple and Yen Ruoshu. Seeing that the sky was already dark, Imotienga casually found a place on the altar to sit and meditate. She didn't know whether this place was safe or not, so she naturally didn't dare to cultivate. She just adjusted her breath. Her surroundings were completely silent, but all of a sudden, she heard a whimper. Imotienga opened her eyes, then turned to look at the 2 women, Yun and Lu. The one who was crying was Yun Hanyan. She was sitting with tears in her eyes, hugging her knees, looking like she wanted to cry but didn't dare to. "Miss Yun." The cultivator surnamed Lu walked to the front of the 2 women, then asked softly, "What's wrong?" Yun Hanyan raised her head. Her eyes were brimming with tears, looking delicate and lovely. She said in a trembling voice, "I..." She wanted to say something but didn't dare to. The cultivator surnamed Wang also walked over. Upon seeing her like this, the 2 male cultivators both looked comforted. The cultivator surnamed Lu seized the initiative and comforted her. "Miss Yun, don't worry. I'm here. I'll protect you." Upon hearing what he said, Yun Hanyan blinked, and a tear fell from her eye. "Really?" The 2 male cultivators nodded desperately. Imotienga originally thought that senior martial sister Lu would laugh at her, but unexpectedly she didn't. She glanced at her, only to find that senior martial sister Lu was sitting in a daze. Her eyes were unfocused, and she looked like she had lost her soul. From time to time, she would smile sweetly, but in the end, her expression would be infinitely sad. Imotienga remembered that senior martial sister Lu and Yun Hanyan were fighting over a man's favor during the day. Apparently, she was thinking about her big brother Tang. However, judging from her expression and the conversation they had during the day, she was probably thinking about sad things. Seeing Yun Hanyan talking to the 2 cultivators like a little white rabbit, then comparing it to the desolate expression on senior martial sister Lu's face, Imotienga couldn't help but sympathize with her. No matter who was right or wrong between them, right now, it was very obvious who had more true feelings for her. Yun Hanyan was probably used to winning men's favor like this, but this female cultivator surnamed Lu was now only thinking about her big brother Tang. In fact, it wasn't strange that big brother Tang liked Yun Hanyan more. Both men and women thought the other party was very strange. Women liked by men were usually not recognized by the same sex, and men liked by women were usually considered by men to be embroidered pillows. No matter whether Yun Hanyan pretended to be weak or pitiful, men always fell for this trick. But that person shouldn't be like this, right? In his eyes, men and women seem to be the same. Aside from cultivating, he had nothing else to do. After thinking for a long time, Daoist Fangjing suddenly shouted in the darkness, "Who's there?" Imotienga was startled. She immediately stood up and prepared to fight. She spread her divine sense, but in the next second she was stunned. In the darkness, a tall man slowly walked towards her. He wore a high hat and a broad belt, looked heroic, and his whole body emitted a frightening momentum. The other people's expressions changed greatly. This momentum? He was a core formation senior. After seeing this person clearly, Daoist Fangjing looked at Mo Zhe's reaction out of habit. However, he saw Mo Tiange staring at that person, seemingly thinking about something. He didn't have time to think too much. He cupped his hands and tried to speak as calmly and respectfully as possible. "Senior, I'm Junior Fangjing. May I ask how Senior got here?" That person didn't pay him any attention and walked straight towards Mo Tiange. Fangjing and the others were horrified. Although they outnumbered him, the other party was a core formation cultivator. The gap between a core formation cultivator and a foundation building cultivator was too big. They didn't know where this person came from. If he harbored evil intentions towards them, he only needed to wave his hand and they would probably, under their fearful and trembling gazes, that person finally stopped several feet away from them. Mo Tiange also heaved a sigh of relief. She glanced at him and said, "This is an illusion." "An illusion?" Fangjing and the others were startled, but they still looked at him cautiously. They were afraid this illusion would have the same attack power as the one they encountered. "Tiange," the illusion spoke all of a sudden. Fangjing and the others were startled once again. Cultivators Lu and Wang didn't need to say anything since they'd never seen a person's illusion. Although Fangjing and the two disciples Yun and Lu had seen the illusion of Big Brother Tang, that illusion couldn't speak. The illusion walked towards Mo Tiange step by step and said softly, "Tiange, why didn't you say goodbye to me when you left?" Mo Tiange closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she found the illusion was still there. She could only smile bitterly. "Why should I say goodbye to you?" The illusion paused for a moment then said, "You shouldn't have come to say goodbye. I didn't want to see you." Although Mo Tiange knew the illusion in front of her was fake, she still felt her heart tighten. After a long time, she finally exhaled and said softly, "Yes. I don't know the reason, but you've already used your actions to explain that you don't want to see me. I also don't want to see you again. Go, don't appear in front of me again." As she spoke, she closed her eyes and turned her head. Upon hearing what she said, the illusion stood there for a while then suddenly walked forward until he was very close to her. Mo Tiange heard his voice suddenly soften. "In fact, I wanted to see you. I just... His hand was about to wrap around her, but Mo Tiange took a step back. She said those words because she hoped the illusion would disappear on its own, but she couldn't control her thoughts. She took a deep breath, raised her head, and stared at the illusion that was almost no different from the real person in front of her. She said word by word, "You're fake." "I don't want to fake." The illusion smiled. It was a smile that rarely appeared on the real person. "I'm real. You want me to be real." Mo Tiange realized her state of mind was very chaotic. She knew this illusion wouldn't disappear, but she almost couldn't control herself. "Fellow Daoist Ji." At this time, Fangjing shouted and threw a talisman at her. This is a heart-calming talisman. Mo Tiange took it and stuck it on her body without hesitation. Although her state of mind couldn't calm down immediately, it was no longer chaotic. She slowly calmed her breathing, but she was seriously looking at the illusion in front of her. "I admit that I have feelings for you, but I want to walk the path of immortal ascension. If you love me, I'll be happy. If you hate me, I won't be sad." The man in the light blue Daoist robe finally faded away as she spoke. When the illusion completely disappeared, Fangjing and the others finally heaved sighs of relief. A core formation cultivator. The illusion here had the power of a real person. If they really fought with this illusion, they wouldn't even need to think of a way to get out because they would die here. "Fellow Daoist Ji." At that moment, Daoist Fangjing looked at Mo Tiange with a different gaze. Just now, he heard the illusion call her by another name, so he knew the name Yi Xiaotian was most likely fake. But it didn't matter. They were just strangers who met by chance. Maybe they wouldn't see each other again after they parted, so what did it matter what name she was called? The most important thing was that the illusion just now was a core formation cultivator. This woman had an unusual relationship with a core formation cultivator, which meant her identity was more complicated than he imagined. In that case, he definitely couldn't offend her. In addition, Fang Jing noticed something else. He had been in the cultivation world for several hundred years and met countless cultivators, so he recognized at a glance that the illusion was wearing the Daoist robe of Xianxia school, the number 2 cultivation group in the celestial pole. Apparently, this woman was also related to Xianxia school. In a flash, relying on his rich experience, Daoist Fang Jing analyzed all this and had a rough idea of what to do. Whether it was because of her hidden identity or the abilities she showed so far, he absolutely couldn't offend this woman. Mo Tiange wiped the sweat on her forehead, then smiled at Daoist Fang Jing. Fellow Daoist Fang Jing, thank you for the heart-calming talisman just now. The price of a heart-calming talisman is quite high. It's not cheap. I don't want fellow Daoists to lose it for no reason, so I might as well exchange this talisman with you. Daoist Fang Jing took the talisman and looked at it. This was actually a foundation-building cultivator's invisibility talisman. He originally felt distressed about using a heart-calming talisman that cost more than 100 spirit stones, but now he realized he made a huge profit. A foundation-building cultivator's invisibility talisman was priceless. Even if it could be bought, it would cost at least several hundred spirit stones. Thank you, fellow Daoist. I won't be polite. Chapter 161. Mo Tiange had her own considerations as to why she immediately used an invisibility talisman. First of all, she was no longer the miserable little aura-refining cultivator she was before. She had a school and a master, so a mere invisibility talisman wasn't something she felt distressed about. Secondly, although pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger was an extremely effective move, there was no need for it if one was strong enough. There were a total of 5 groups of people here, so it would be very good if these 3 Bichuan court female disciples didn't drag them down. In terms of fighting strength, Mo Tiange didn't care at all. The 2 male cultivators, Lu and Wang, both had relatively high cultivation levels and weren't weak. If they joined forces, Mo Tiange would have a hard time dealing with them. However, the 2 of them weren't united. The Yao couple had great teamwork, but their cultivations were a little low. Daoist Fang Jing's cultivation level was relatively high, and he was also strong in fights of magical powers. However, he didn't have many treasures, so Mo Tiange believed it wouldn't be difficult for her to deal with him if she went all out. That being the case, she might as well show her strength. Others might not know, but Daoist Fang Jing was a smart man. Not only would he revere her, but he would also sincerely regard her as his companion. In this illusory array, if there was no one to warn him, he would easily fall into the trap. Having an ally was better than being alone. After giving Daoist Fang Jing an invisibility talisman, she casually chatted with him for a while, then found a corner and sat cross-legged to meditate. Because of that illusion just now, the 2 cultivators Lu and Wang couldn't be bothered to curry favor with Yun Hanyan anymore. Instead, they hid to the side and whispered to each other, seemingly discussing Mo Tiange's real identity. She didn't care what these people thought of her. After they left this valley, they would go their separate ways. Who would know who was who? Just like that, the night passed without any danger. There were several kinds of illusions in the middle. Fortunately, they reminded each other, so nothing serious happened. The sky was bright and birds were chirping. The first ray of morning sunlight finally shone into the valley. The valley was surrounded by steep cliffs, and the sun shone in at 9 o'clock. The 6 people present were all foundation-building cultivators, so they didn't need to deliberately rest. It was just that after a night of fright, Yun and Lu were not in good spirits. Mo Tiange and Daoist Fang Jing glanced at each other. They both saw helplessness in each other's eyes. These female cultivators were really unable to accomplish anything but were good at spoiling things. He wanted to leave them behind, but he was afraid that it would affect him. Even after the sky brightened, there were still no signs of activity. The 2 people, Wang and Lu, couldn't sit still anymore. After whispering to each other for a while, they walked towards Mo Tiange and Daoist Fang Jing together. It hadn't even been a day since they were trapped inside the formation, but they already formed a small group. Yun, Lu, and Wang were from the same cultivation group, so even if they had any conflicts, they were still together. Mo Tiange and Daoist Fangjing were both single people, and their habits were also quite similar, so they were naturally closer to each other. Fellow Daoists. The one speaking was the cultivator surnamed Lu. Mo Tiange and Daoist Fangjing opened their eyes and stared at them. Lu and Wang also sat down cross-legged in front of them and said, "Fellow Daoists, we can't go on like this. High-level illusory formations usually consume the energy of those who enter the formation. The longer we stay here, the more disadvantageous it will be for us. Who knows, one day we might run out of blood essence." Daoist Fangjing was taken aback. "Consume blood essence?" The cultivator surnamed Wang answered, "Correct. We two martial brothers are disciples of Gigu School. Our Gigu School originated from Tianliang School. Now that Tianliang School has long been exterminated, our Gigu School is definitely the strongest in the field of formations." It was only now that these two cultivators revealed their sex inheritance. Mo Tiange had indeed heard of Gigu School. Although what the cultivator surnamed Wang said was a bit exaggerated, it wasn't far from the truth. There weren't any big cultivation groups in the celestial pole that were proficient in formations. There were only several medium-sized cultivation groups that were proficient in formations, and Gigu School could be considered one of the best among them. However, the corners of Mo Tiange's mouth curved into a faint smile. What the two people said was a bit too shocking. She had studied illusory formations before, and there was indeed a saying about consuming blood essence, but that only happened when one was bewitched. Inside an illusory formation, if one was bewitched by the illusion, their blood essence would be absorbed by the formation. However, if one's mind was firm, they wouldn't be affected too much. Upon seeing her expression, the two people surnamed Lu and Wang felt a bit restless. They didn't know what she meant, so they glanced at each other. The cultivator surnamed Lu then said with a smile, "Little brother is Lu Xianxin, and this is my junior martial brother, Wang Xianxia. May I know how to address you two?" She didn't know whether Daoist Fangjing had greeted them or not, but the mechanism was activated the moment Mo Tiange entered the hall of the five-colored five elements platform. She only heard their surnames from Shangron. "My Daoist name is Fangjing." Daoist Fangjing nodded at the two people. Mo Tiange then said, "Yi Shan." The two people surnamed Lu and Wang were only surprised for a moment, but they didn't care too much about why her name sounded different from last night. The four of them greeted each other again. Lu Xianxin then said, "Fellow Daoists, in short, if we stay in this illusory formation for another day, we'll suffer some injuries. It'd be better for us to leave as soon as possible." Mo Tiange chuckled. "We've always wanted to leave, but we just couldn't find the direction. Since fellow Daoist said this, could it be that you found a way?" "This." Lu Xianxin hesitated for a moment. Wang Xiangji took over the conversation. "Miss Yi, to be honest, this formation is indeed brilliant. We two martial brothers also can't figure it out, but we can't just sit and do nothing, can we?" Daoist Fangjing glanced at Mo Tiange's expression then asked, "Then what should we do in your opinion?" Upon hearing Daoist Fangjing's tone of relief, Lu Xianxin's spirits were lifted. "According to our research on formations, no matter how brilliant a formation is, it's impossible for it to be flawless. This valley isn't big, but it's very complicated. If we look around a bit, we'll definitely be able to find it." "You're right." Mo Tiange cast a glance at the two people surnamed Yun and Lu. "There are 6 of us. Should we split up and look?" The two people surnamed Lu and Wang noticed her meaningful glance. They were both smart people, so how could they not understand what she meant? They immediately became somewhat hesitant. "This," Mo Tiange put on a fake smile. "Fellow Daoists, we can't just eat and not work." Lu Xianxin was fine, but Wang Xiangji's face instantly flushed upon hearing what she said. Mo Tiange glanced at the two people surnamed Yun and Lu, meaning to ask whether they would be responsible for these two people. The two people surnamed Lu and Wang hesitated. After all, although they were trying to please them, their lives were still a bit more important. Mo Tiange mocked them for wanting to take advantage of them but not wanting to take responsibility. Wang Xianxia was thin-skinned. Seeing as Mo Tiange was also a beautiful woman, mocking him to his face inevitably made him lose face. For a moment, the situation became awkward. Only the two people surnamed Yun and Lu were far away, so they didn't notice anything. Daoist Fangjing coughed then said, "Fellow Daoists, I'll tell you the truth. I'm already being polite by not taking their lives. I don't want to work for other people." Daoist Fangjing was an individual cultivator. The world of individual cultivators was much crueler than that of cultivation group disciples. Generally speaking, people who didn't show enough strength wouldn't be accepted if they went on an adventure together. Right now, he was already being polite by not making things difficult for these two Bichuan court female cultivators. After all, this matter wasn't the same as agreeing to go on an adventure. The 9 of them were inadvertently tied together. Since Daoist Fangjing already said this much, the two people surnamed Lu and Wang had nothing else to say. They glanced at each other, then Lu Xiangxin said, "All right, the 4 of us will continue to search. As for the others, we won't care about them. Of course, we'll occupy the 5 elements platforms separately, so it'd be best for us to take our lives into consideration." What he said gained the approval of the other 3 people. After a brief discussion, Lu Xiangxin told the 2 people surnamed Yun and Lu. Mo Tiange wasn't interested in what they had to say. She only saw from afar that Yun Hanyan lowered her head and wiped her tears as soon as she heard what Lu Xiangxin said. It was only after Lu Xiangxin comforted her that he returned with a bitter smile. Mo Tiange didn't feel like caring about other people's business, and Daoist Fangjing naturally didn't care about this kind of youngster's pestering. The 4 of them were silent the whole way. They came down from the altar and slowly searched. Not too far from the altar, Wang Xiangji suddenly called out. Although the 4 of them were together, they were searching separately. At that moment, the other 3 people all raised their heads and looked at him. Wang Xiangji's expression was heavy as he beckoned them over. The 3 of them flew towards him. Once they arrived at Wang Xiangji's location, Mo Tiange's expression immediately darkened. It was Yen Ruoshu. Yen Ruoshu was currently lying on a 5 elements platform. Her complexion was deathly pale and she wasn't breathing at all. Mo Tiange crouched down and tried to inject her spiritual aura into Yen Ruoshu's body, but it was to no avail. She stood up and shook her head. There's no saving her. They were trapped inside this illusory formation. Although they couldn't leave, they weren't in any danger. Now that someone died, the 4 of them had grave expressions on their faces. Although this formation was an illusory formation, it could still kill people. Among the 4 of them, Mo Tiange was the only woman, so she was naturally in charge of examining the corpse. There weren't any injuries on Yen Ruoshu's body. Her clothes were intact and there were no signs of a struggle. It was as if she suddenly died here. Mo Tiange examined her carefully. In the end, she discovered that Yen Ruoshu's posture was a bit strange. Her hand was stretched to one side as if she wanted to grab something. "How is it?" Wang Xiangji asked anxiously. Mo Tiange didn't answer. She once again used her spiritual aura to strike the top of Yen Ruoshu's head. After a person died, their meridians became rigid and spiritual aura couldn't be injected into them. However, the top of the head was a shortcut to the dantian, so spiritual aura could still be injected into it. Several breaths later, Mo Tiange let go of her hand and stood up with a grave expression. "Fellow Daoist Yi, how is it?" Daoist Fangjing also asked with concern. Mo Tiange sighed and said, all of her blood essence was exhausted. Apparently, she was blinded by the illusion and couldn't struggle free in the end. Judging from Yen Ruoshu's posture, she was obviously trying to grab something, but there was nothing in front of her. That thing should be her illusion. Once she died, the illusion naturally disappeared. The other 3 people were once again silent. Lu Xiangxin and Wang Xiangji glanced at each other. Both of them saw a hint of astonishment in each other's eyes. They previously said they would die from exhaustion of their blood essence just to scare these 2 people. They never expected that such a thing would actually happen. How could they not panic? Mo Tiange muttered to herself for a while, then said, "Fellow Daoist, it seems fellow Daoist Yan's death happened last night, but we didn't feel anything at all." Daoist Fangjing was dumbfounded. "Fellow Daoist, are you saying our lives won't be affected by other people?" "That's not necessarily the case." Mo Tiange took out an empty Qianquan bag, then waved her hand to put Yan Ruoshu's corpse away. After all, the three of them were on the same stone platform. Maybe it's enough as long as one of them is alive. Seeing her putting Yan Ruoshu's corpse away made the other three people rather envious. Of course, it wasn't because they had strange hobbies. They were just envious of the things on Yan Ruoshu's body. However, they also didn't dare to offend Mo Tiange because of this. She didn't directly take the Qianquan bag, she put the corpse away instead, most likely to give it to the other two female cultivators. However, this already proves that if we're confused by the illusion, it's indeed possible that we'll die from exhaustion of our blood essence. The three people once again fell into silence. "Alright, let's not waste time here. Let's keep looking." Daoist Fangjing nodded. "We should be more careful. Let's search in pairs." Although they didn't split up, they searched separately. Now, they didn't dare to split up anymore. They formed a team of two and slowly searched along the way. The atmosphere was depressing. Perhaps it was lucky or unlucky, but right after they searched that intersection, they suddenly heard a cry of alarm. The four of them looked at each other to make sure it wasn't an illusion, then they flew towards the source of the sound. They didn't fly far before Mo Tiange's sharp eyes saw Shang Ruan's figure on a 5 elements platform. She was delighted, but she was immediately alarmed. That was indeed Shang Ruan, but there was another person not far from her. "Ah!" Wang Xianxia cried out in surprise. He said in astonishment, That's fellow Daoist Yao, but why? Mo Tiange also frowned deeply. Judging from his figure, that was indeed Yao Zixio. But the strange thing was, his cultivation level was actually in the core formation realm. How was that possible? She couldn't rule out the possibility that there were some fated chances inside this illusory formation, but there was no way it could allow a cultivator to directly jump from the early stage of the foundation building realm to the core formation realm. Foundation building cultivators' dantians and meridians could only hold so much spiritual aura, but the spiritual aura of a core formation realm cultivator would increase by 1,000 times, and their dantians and meridians would need to be reshaped. Even if they had enough spiritual aura to allow a cultivator to directly jump from the early stage of the foundation building realm to the core formation realm, it would still take them 1 to 3 years to remold their bodies. Could it be an illusion? But judging from Shang Ruan's expression, it didn't seem like it. The other three people were hesitant about whether they should approach her or not. After all, the spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator was real, and they didn't dare to clash with a core formation cultivator. At that moment, Mo Tiange was already flying towards Shang Ruan. "Fellow Daoist Yi!" Daoist Fangjing called out but didn't stop her. He helplessly continued to hesitate. When he turned around, he saw that Lu Xiangxin and Wang Xianxia both had restless expressions on their faces. Daoist Fangjing knew the situation wasn't good, so he hastily said, "Fellow Daoists, do you really believe there's a way to allow someone to directly jump from the early stage of the foundation building realm to the core formation realm?" Lu Xiangxin and Wang Xianxia glanced at each other, then smiled perfunctorily. "How could we? We're just curious. Aren't you curious?" This Daoist Fangjing's gaze wavered. How could he not be curious? As an individual cultivator, how much effort did it take for him to cultivate to the middle stage of the foundation building realm? He didn't have much time left in his lifespan, so he was eager to find fated chances to advance to the late stage and advance to the core formation realm. However, fellow Daoists, you'd better calm down. I'm curious, but how could there be such a shortcut in this world? Yesterday, we were almost deceived by that white jade snow lotus. Do you two still remember? What he said stunned the two of them, but they soon calmed down a bit. Daoist Fangjing said, "There's no harm in watching. If there's anything wrong, it won't be too late to leave." On the other side, Mo Tiange flew to Shang Ruan's side, then called out softly, "Big Sister Shang, are you all right?" Shangruan was so distracted that she actually didn't notice someone was coming. Now that she saw Imotienga, she immediately grabbed Imotienga's hand and said with a panicked expression, "Little sister Yi, big sister, don't panic." Seeing that Shangruan couldn't even speak properly, Imotienga hastily comforted her. "Tell me what happened first. Was that your husband?" However, although it was only 3 years, the actual time wasn't like that, which was why he didn't make any progress in his cultivation. Shangruan didn't care about it, but Yao Zixio was unwilling, which led to this unforeseen event. But what was going on with Yao Zixio? Imotienga couldn't figure this out. She herself obtained a great fated chance, whether it was the deification great ancestor or the virtual sky world. But she didn't believe there was any fated chance in this world that could allow someone to advance from the early stage of the foundation building realm to the core formation realm overnight. "Big Sister Shang," after a long time, Imotienga said slowly, "I don't think your husband has been possessed by the devil." Chapter 162. Shangruan stared at Imotienga in a daze. She didn't understand what she meant. Imotienga stared at Yao Zixio, who was flying in the air, and said slowly, "This life is eternal. This life is eternal. Eternal is only one day. In this place, aside from leaving, any wish can be granted. If you want a paradise, I'll give you a paradise. If he wants to hold his head high, I'll give him that." She looked down at Shangruan with pity and sadness. "So, it's all fake. Your 3 years were fake, and his core formation was also fake." Shangruan was shocked. She didn't come back to her senses for a long time. Imotienga continued to say, "This illusory formation will show the things everyone wants the most. Big sister, what you want the most is an undisturbed life for the two of you, and what he wants the most." Imotienga didn't continue. Shangruan already understood what she meant. Shangruan was stunned for a long time before she asked slowly, "Then, what's the result?" Upon seeing Shangruan's expression, Imotienga almost didn't have the heart to say it, but she had to. "That fellow Daoist Yen has already fallen. We're sure she was bewitched. She was blinded by the illusion and died because her blood essence was exhausted." Shangruan was shocked. She stared blankly at her husband who was entangled in the black fog in the air. She didn't say anything for a long time. Death, what he wanted the most, *****. She remembered the first time she met her father's new disciple 90 years ago. "You're called Yao Zixio? Do you know who I am?" Although that young boy had arrogance in his eyes, he didn't treat her like a child. Instead, he bowed cautiously. "Greetings to Senior Martial Sister." She smiled proudly and pretended to cough twice. Nodding, she said, "Yes, you're very polite." Eldest Martial Brother teased her. "Little Junior Martial Brother, you're a bit older than Little Junior Martial Sister. You can just call her Junior Martial Sister." The young boy looked at her and said earnestly, "I entered the sect later than Senior Martial Sister, so I should call her Senior Martial Sister." She was so happy that she shouted at Eldest Martial Brother, "Yes, Senior Martial Sister." She turned around and patted her small chest. "Little Junior Martial Brother, I'll protect you from now on." She remembered 70 years ago when she just built her foundation. What's so good about that kid? Listen to me obediently and marry your big brother and I. She knelt in front of her father, motionless, but she held her head high, unwilling to yield. Rebellious daughter. Her father flew into a rage and slammed his palm down on her. Her father, who was at the peak of foundation building, showed almost no mercy in this palm. She spat out a mouthful of blood and her meridians were heavily injured, but she still clenched her teeth and refused to let go. Her mother wept at the side. "What the? Just listen to your father. Obedient." No, she struggled to get up and used all her strength to kneel in front of her father. She said word by word, "Father, if you force me, I will die." No one had ever dared to disobey her father like this, not even herself. But at this moment, she had no regrets. She remembered 60 years ago when he finally reached the Zhuji phase. "Father, Junior martial brother has built his foundation. She happily ran into the hall. There was no joy on her father's face. Instead, he coldly said, "If you hadn't secretly given him the foundation-building pills you hid, how could he have built his foundation?" She was stunned. She didn't understand why her father, who had already tacitly accepted this matter, would be so cold. "Father, didn't you personally accept Junior martial brother as your disciple? Why do you treat him?" If it wasn't because his family once had a core formation cultivator and definitely had treasures, why would I accept him with his aptitude? She never expected her father to say such a thing. "Father!" she shouted in disbelief. "You're using Junior martial brother? What do you mean by using or not using?" Her father's expression was indifferent. If I hadn't accepted him as my disciple, how could he have lived these several decades of good days? How could he have built his foundation? Your big brother and I still misses you. He built his foundation long ago. With his aptitude, it won't be a problem for him to advance to the middle stage of the core formation realm in a dozen or so years. You should calm down. Father, why didn't you promise me that you wouldn't force me to marry big brother and I? Today is different from the past. You can't be willful anymore. Her father's expression was 30% indifferent and 70% complacent. The betrothal gift your uncle and I gave me was a dustless pill. I've been begging for this pill for many years. With this dustless pill, maybe you can enter the core formation realm in one go. Father's great way of core formation is in your hands. She remembered that night. Junior martial brother, let's go. Let's go. She grabbed his hand and said while shedding tears. The little boy from back then was now a gentle and steady young man. He held her hand and said in astonishment, "Senior martial sister, what's wrong?" She said while crying, "If we don't go now, it'll be too late. Father still wants me to marry big brother and I. And I family already said that even if I die, they'll carry me into their family." He turned pale with fright and was stunned on the spot. "Junior martial brother, if we don't go now, it'll be too late. My mother's heart softened, so she let me out. I'll only have one night. Tomorrow. This." His expression was gloomy. After a long time, he finally clenched his teeth and said, "All right, senior martial sister, let's go. We'll go far away and never let them find us again." She remembered the day they got married. There were no guests, no wedding clothes. There were only the ice-cold moonlight and two lonely shadows. "With heaven and earth as my witness and the bright moon as my matchmaker, Shangron will marry Yao Zixio and never leave him in this lifetime." He also made a vow. "With heaven and earth as my witness and the bright moon as my matchmaker, I, Yao Zixio, will marry Shang Rowan and we'll live and die together in this lifetime." The ice-cold night wind blew. Not far from them, a pack of wolves howled under the moon, but she felt her whole heart was filled with happiness. "Senior martial sister, do you still want to call me senior martial sister now?" He was stunned for a moment before he smiled. "You're younger than me, so I'll call you little sister Wan from now on. What do you think?" She also smiled and called out softly, "Big brother Xiao." It had been 60 years. Although she didn't have a fixed abode and her cultivation level didn't advance, she had always been very satisfied. Her heart was very big. No one could make her feel happy except for him. Her heart was also very small. As long as she was with him, she would feel happy. Her tears fell. This was the first time she realized that happiness was so far away from her. "Be careful." Mo Tienga grabbed Shang Rowan and retreated hastily. The mass of black fog floating in the air suddenly exploded. Yao Zixio opened his eyes, and his momentum soared. The core formation realm. No matter what the reason was, the Yao Zixio in front of her was undoubtedly in the core formation realm. Inside this illusory formation, the illusions created wouldn't disappear unless one's willpower shifted. Otherwise, the illusions were no different from real people. Mo Tienga turned around to look. Fangjing, Lu Xiangxin, and Wang Xiangji also had astonished expressions. Once he regained his senses, Fangjing signaled them with his eyes and shouted in a low voice, Go! The four of them, along with Shang Ruan, who was being pulled by Imotienga, fled into the distance. But in the next second, a majestic momentum soared from behind them. Two blood-curdling screams rang out. Lu and Wang, who were lagging behind, were sent flying. One crashed into a tree trunk while the other fell on a 5 elements platform. Both of them vomited blood. It was unclear whether they were still alive or not. Stop! Yao Zixio shouted loudly. Imotienga quickly turned around. Daoist Fangzheng, who wasn't too far behind her, also stopped and turned around. At that moment, Yao Zixio's eyes were bloodshot and burning with raging flames. His robe fluttered even though there was no wind, and the momentum of a core formation cultivator assaulted their senses. Yao Zixio slowly swept his gaze over them. His gaze was cold and arrogant, as if he was looking at several ants. In the end, when his gaze fell on Shangron, his cold aura finally relaxed a bit. He said, "Little Sister Wan, we can go back now. I can take you back now." In the end, he actually threw his head back and laughed heartily. His voice was incomparably arrogant. Shangron slowly broke free from Imotienga's grip, then walked forward step by step. "Big Sister Shang." Imotienga couldn't help but call out. She could see that although Yao Zixio's cultivation level wasn't possessed by the devil, his mental state was. Right now, he could still recognize Shang Ruan, but who knew if he'd still retain his rationality in the next moment. Shang Ruan's footsteps faltered. She turned around and smiled at Imotienga. For some reason, Imotienga felt that Shang Ruan's smile looked even more desperate than her crying. Shang Ruan said softly, "Little Sister Yi, thank you for being so kind. This matter isn't related to you. In a moment, let's go." Imotienga was dumbfounded. Shang Ruan had already turned around and was flying towards Yao Zixio. Yao Zixio reached out and embraced her. He said complacently, "Little Sister Wan, are you happy?" Shang Ruan shook her head and said faintly, "I'm not happy." Yao Zixio wrinkled his brows, then asked anxiously, "Why? All these years, didn't you really want to go back? Now we can go back justifiably. Your father won't say anything anymore." "Is that so?" Shang Ruan's gaze was bone-chilling. "Big Brother Xiao, is your current cultivation level real?" Yao Zixio was stunned for a moment before he became furious. "Little Sister Wan, what do you mean? Of course my cultivation level is real. Take a look." He pulled Shang Ruan's hand, eager to prove himself. "This is the cultivation technique I obtained just now. As it turns out, there really are fated chances here. The master of this place was a cultivator with great divine power. After he passed away, he sealed his cultivation technique here, and I happened to obtain it." Shang Ruan looked at his complacent appearance indifferently. There was only deep sorrow in her heart. 100 years. 100 years. She finally saw this person clearly, this person she loved the most. As it turned out, in his heart, cultivation had always been the most important thing. As it turned out, this was the result he'd always wanted. She took the jade slip from Yao Zixio's hand and injected her divine sense into it. Soon after, she sneered and threw it back to him. "Big Brother Xiao, take a look yourself. See what this is." Yao Zixio received the jade slip with doubt, but his expression changed greatly. Imotienga didn't know what happened, but she could make a rough guess. This so-called fated chance was just Yao Zixio's imagination. This jade slip naturally didn't contain any cultivation technique. It was either empty or completely useless. With one look, Yao Zixio naturally knew something was wrong. "No, it's real. It's real." At first, he was mumbling to himself, but in the end, Yao Zixio's expression turned ruthless. He turned around and glared furiously at Imotienga and Fangzheng. "Did you steal it? Did you?" "Big Brother Xiao," Shang Ruan shouted and grabbed his sleeve. "It has nothing to do with other people. This is an illusory formation, so you're hallucinating." "Illusory formation? Hallucination? No, you're lying to me. You're lying to me." Yao Zixio's momentum gushed out. With a wave of his arm, Shang Ruan cried out in alarm and fell from midair. Under Yao Zixio's gaze, Tiange didn't dare to move. She could only watch helplessly as Shang Ruan fell. No matter how weak Yao Zixio was before, inside this illusory formation, he was a genuine core formation cultivator. No matter how arrogant Tiange was, she didn't think she could fight against a core formation cultivator. If she fought, she couldn't win. If she ran, the valley was only this big, so she couldn't escape. Enter the virtual sky world? To enter the virtual sky world, she had to use the incantation, which would take at least 3 breaths of time. However, Yao Zixio was staring at them. If she made even the slightest movement, he might kill them. She didn't have a single breath of time. Big Brother Xiao. Shang Ruan was obviously injured, but she still struggled to get up. Big Brother Xiao, don't. You'll be possessed by the devil. Little Sister Wan, you don't need to say anything. Do you think I don't know? Yao Zixio's eyes were bloodshot, making him look even more demonic. Back then, your father accepted me as his disciple because he fancied my Yao clan's treasures. To make him agree to let you marry me, I offered my Yao clan's ancestors' secret technique. But what did your father do? 10 years later, he still wanted you to marry someone else. Moreover, this time, I was already useless, and he even wanted to kill me. What? Shang Ruan was shocked. My father, you don't know, right? Yao Zixio grinned. His calm and refined demeanor could no longer be seen. His ruthless appearance was even more frightening. Back then, it wasn't because he loved you, his daughter, but because I offered Yao clan's treasures to him. But even so, he only let us off for 10 years. When you came to look for me that day, I already received news that he wanted to kill me. I originally planned to leave by myself, but you came looking for me. I couldn't bear to part with you. Shang Ruan's lips trembled, but she couldn't say anything. It was actually like this. No wonder he was so eager to cultivate, no wonder he probably wanted to take revenge after he formed his gold core. She suddenly burst into tears. As it turned out, there was no solution. There was no solution at all. She thought she only needed to persuade him, but it turned out he actually had this kind of reason. Even if he was willing to walk out of the illusory formation, he was still thinking about taking revenge. Little Sister Wan, Yao Zixio said softly, don't worry. For your sake, I won't take his life. It'll be enough if I just cripple his cultivation level. All these years, I've been asking around, but your father didn't succeed in forming his gold core. Retribution, this is retribution. Once he finished laughing, Yao Zixio shifted his gaze towards Tiange and Daoist Fangjing. He said slowly, I'll start with the 2 of you. Come, let me see your skills. Both Tiange's and Daoist Fangjing's expressions darkened. Each of them held their magic tools or magic weapons tightly. Yao Zixio seemed like a cat teasing a mouse. He didn't attack right away, as if he was really waiting to see their skills. After a moment of silence, Tiange said, Fellow Daoist Yao, you don't believe this is an illusory formation? I believe it, Yao Zixio said with his head held high. However, advancing to the core formation realm wasn't an illusion. If it was an illusion, I wouldn't have such a clear feeling. I've really become stronger. This feeling? While he was still reminiscing, Tiange smiled. Yes, it's a feeling, but feelings can be wrong. You, Yao Zixio glared at her angrily after being denied again. He raised his hand, and a ball made of spiritual aura gradually appeared in his palm. Tiange and Daoist Fangjing became even more nervous. Core formation cultivators could materialize their spiritual aura, so a strike from a spiritual energy ball like that definitely wasn't something foundation-building cultivators like them could withstand. Big Brother Xiao! Shang Ruan shouted, Big Brother Xiao, please let them go. If you want to take revenge, it has nothing to do with them, shut up. Yao Zixio shouted, in the cultivation world, what's the big deal about killing people? You're just being soft-hearted. I'm afraid you'll be possessed by the devil. Possessed by the devil? So what if I'm possessed by the devil? Yao Zixio sneered. If I can obtain such formidable power, I'm willing to be possessed by the devil. Besides, what's the harm in being possessed by the devil? Master Song Feng is a great late-stage nascent soul cultivator, but didn't he also kill innocent people? I've never seen his cultivation level affected by being possessed by the devil. What inner devil? What moral integrity? They're all fake. Shang Ruan couldn't persuade him anymore. She stared blankly at the overbearing Yao Zixio with tears rolling down her cheeks. She said mournfully, "What about me? What do you want to do with me? What should I do if you're possessed by the devil?" Yao Zixio was silent. His expression softened as if her words touched the softest part of his heart. At that moment, Immortal gave Daoist Fangzheng a meaningful glance. The two of them understood each other tacitly and started to make their own preparations. "Big brother Xiao, do you still remember the vow we made that day?" "I, Shangron, will marry Yao Zixio and I'll never leave him in this lifetime." Shangron wiped the blood from the corners of her mouth, then flew up while swaying. She reached out to him. "Big brother Xiao, don't leave me." Yao Zixio couldn't help but also reach out to hold her hand. His voice also softened. "I, Yao Zixio, will marry Shangruan and we'll live and die together in this lifetime." A smile finally appeared on Shangruan's face as she leaned towards him. She watched as Yao Zixio couldn't help but pull her into his embrace. A magic tool suddenly appeared and ruthlessly pierced Yao Zixio's heart. Ah, it was Shangruan's miserable scream. That short sword-shaped magic tool appeared in Yao Zixio's heart. Yao Zixio held the hilt of the short sword. He exerted some force and the sword was pulled out, creating a trail of blood. He swayed, but he still managed to stand firm. He stared at Shangron, who fell on a 5 elements platform after he swung his arm. His anger soared and he shouted in pain, "You actually want to kill me?" Shangruan fell on the 5 elements platform. She couldn't move at all, but her gaze was smiling. "Big brother Xiao, we'll never leave you in this lifetime. That being the case, let's die together." With every word she said, she kept vomiting blood. By the time she finished speaking, she was already covered in blood. Immortal couldn't bear to watch. She suddenly regretted telling Shangruan that death was the result of falling into her trap. Since Yao Zixio wasn't willing to come out of the illusion, he'd die in the end, so she live and die together, live and die together. She never thought the love between lovers in the mortal world could be realized in the cultivation world, but now, little sister Wan. Yao Zixio was dumbfounded. He floated in the air in a daze. Blood kept flowing from his heart, but he didn't feel it at all. Core formation, core formation. He suddenly mumbled, "I've formed my gold core, but little sister Wan." As if he suddenly realized what had happened, he rushed over, threw himself on Shangron, pulled her up and shouted, "Little sister Wan! Little sister Wan!" Shangruan was still smiling, but she couldn't move anymore. Immortal could see that she was almost certainly going to die. "Little sister Wan, you..." But Shangruan didn't say anything to him. She just quietly closed her eyes and her breath gradually disappeared. "Little sister Wan!" Yao Zixio shouted. Blood and tears gushed out of his eyes. They saw Yao Zixio gradually losing his color. It was as if he was petrified bit by bit. Slowly, he turned into a skeleton wearing a robe. As for the skeleton, it was still tightly hugging Shangruan's corpse. Chapter 163. Everything was calm. After a long time, Immortal finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although it was someone else's life or death, it was still tragic for her to see it happen right in front of her. And such a tragic life and death was only because they had deep feelings that cultivators shouldn't have. Realizing that her emotions were fluctuating, she immediately gathered her spirit and qi. Taishang Wang Qing did not mean that he was emotionless. Wang Qing meant how could he not be moved by emotions? If one had forgotten, the speaker would care about it, and become complacent and forget to say a word. Emotions were innocent, and emotions were innocent. The sinner was Yao Zixio. There were too many things mixed in his emotions. There was ambition, there was grief, there was hatred. It was these things that prevented him from seeing through them. He was unable to enjoy the joy of love and was constantly tormented by it. Sinners are not sentimental, they are just humans. At that moment, they heard Daoist Fangjing shouting, "Fellow Daoist Yi, look." When Imo looked towards Yao Zixio and Shangruan, she couldn't help but widen her eyes. A misty white light appeared on the bodies of the two people. The light grew brighter and brighter, more and more glaring. All of a sudden, it exploded, and the spiritual energy surged out, causing their auras to churn. They tried to circulate their qi to resist, but they couldn't. The light instantly engulfed them. After an unknown amount of time, Imo finally felt the spiritual aura slowly subsiding. She opened her eyes and was stunned by the scene in front of her. In front of them was clearly the 5 elements platform that they were previously on. Did that mean that the illusory array was broken? She was delighted, but when she turned around, she was startled. There were indeed several other people either lying or sitting on the other 4 stone platforms, but aside from Daoist Fangjing, none of them were awake. Daoist Fangjing also noticed her. He looked at her and said, "Fellow Daoist Yi." Both of them were bewildered. What was going on? Suddenly, with a shake of his feet, the 5 elements platforms began to move towards the center. After a while, with a rumbling sound, the 5 elements platforms combined into one. A ray of light flashed and turned into a big stone platform. Gold, green, blue, red, and yellow, the 5 colors each occupied a circle. It was just like the 5 elements platform in the illusion array, but this stone platform was ridiculously big. What's going on? Daoist Fangjing looked at her. Imo didn't answer. Instead, she lowered her head to examine the other people on the ground. Aside from her and Daoist Fangjing, the other 7 people were all on the stone platforms. Even Yen Ruoshu, whose corpse she put into her Qiankuan bag inside the illusory formation, was no exception. These people didn't seem to have any external injuries, but their faces were pale and they weren't breathing. Imo stretched out her hand to feel Yen Ruoshu and the others' pulses. Their pulses had already stopped, so she couldn't pour her spiritual aura into their bodies. She sighed. "He's dead." Daoist Fangjing examined Lu Xiangxin and Wang Xiangji, then shook his head. "They can't be saved." The two of them looked at each other in confusion. Since Yen Ruoshu's corpse was here, it meant that the illusion formation was a complete fake. Everything they saw and heard in the illusion array was fake. The real them had probably been on the stone platform all this time, not moving at all. But these people still died. Lu Xiangxin and Wang Xiangji were killed by Yao Zixio, who was in the core formation realm. Yen Ruoshu was bewitched by the illusions inside the illusory formation and died after her blood essence was exhausted. Imo didn't know what the 2 women Yun and Lu went through, but their willpower wasn't strong and they didn't get along well with each other, so it wasn't impossible for them to be bewitched together in the end. Yao Zixio was bewitched by his own inner demon and bewitched by the illusions, so Shangruan was killed by Yao Zixio. Imo was terrified when she thought about this. This formation was really terrifying. Everything was fake, but the deaths and injuries were real. "Fellow Daoist Yi," Daoist Fangjing suddenly called out. He was examining Yao Zixio's corpse just now, but now he was pointing at Shangruan. "What's wrong?" "She seems to be alive," Daoist Fangjing said while looking at Shangruan. Imo was stunned. She stepped forward and touched Shangruan's chest. Sure enough, there was still some heat. She hastily took out several green amplifying pills, fed them to Shangruan and poured her spiritual aura into her body. After a long time, Shangruan finally groaned and woke up. "Big Sister Shang." Imo called softly. Shangruan slowly opened her eyes. When she saw Imo she was stunned for a moment. "Little Sister Yi, don't talk for now. Your injuries are very serious. You should adjust your breathing and heal your injuries first." Shangruan didn't do as Imo said. Instead, she thought for a moment as if she recalled what she experienced in the illusory formation. Her complexion suddenly paled, and she turned around. When she saw Yao Zixio lying next to her with his eyes closed, she immediately threw herself at him. "Big Brother Xiao! Big Brother Xiao!" Yao Zixio didn't respond. Daoist Fangjing examined him just now. Yao Zixio really died in the same way Yen Ruoshu died in the illusory formation. He lost all his blood essence. Presumably, it was because he was too obsessed with his own illusions that his blood essence was sucked dry. But Imo couldn't figure out why Shang Ruan was still alive. Lu Xiangxin and Wang Xiangji were both beaten to death by Yao Zixio, but they died for real. It didn't make sense for Shang Ruan to be alive. Big brother Xiao. After confirming Yao Zixio was dead, Shang Ruan was in a daze and didn't move for a long time. Imo didn't know what Shang Ruan was thinking, but she knew Shang Ruan's injuries were too serious. If she didn't heal her injuries soon, she would still die. Big sister Shang. Imo called softly, but Shang Ruan still didn't respond. Upon seeing Shang Ruan's current state, Imo heaved a sigh. She gently raised her hand and shot a spiritual aura at Shang Ruan. Shang Ruan instantly fainted. Daoist Fangjing was astonished. Imo only helped Shang Ruan lie down on the side, then looked up and said, "Fellow Daoist Fangjing, there's only the two of us now. Fellow Daoist, what do you think we should do next?" Daoist Fangjing hesitated for a moment before his gaze swept over the corpses. "Since these fellow Daoists are dead, let's deal with their remains first." Imo understood what he meant by deal with their remains. Among cultivators, if one of their companions died, the remaining people would divide the person's belongings among themselves. Imo wasn't disgusted by this, but she also wasn't too enthusiastic about it because she didn't lack medicinal pills or spirit stones. Therefore, she just nodded absent-mindedly. If Imo was with other people, Daoist Fangjing probably wouldn't have said anything and would have taken those people's chinkuan bags as if it was a matter of course. However, Daoist Fangjing saw that Imo obviously carried the habits of elite disciples of cultivation groups and wasn't like other individual cultivators who only cared about profit. Daoist Fangjing was also afraid of her strength, so he restrained himself a bit. In fact, this was also because Daoist Fangjing was too cautious. Imo was also an individual cultivator and wasn't a young miss from a cultivation group, so she was naturally used to this and basically didn't have any objections. Daoist Fangjing took those 6 people's chinkuan bags one by one. Just as he was about to burn the corpses, he suddenly heard Imo shout and stopped. Imo said, "I'll take Yao Zixio's things. Don't burn his corpse for now." Daoist Fangjing nodded, then put Yao Zixio's corpse on the side. He then handed Yao Zixio's chinkuan bag to her and said, "Fellow Daoist Yi, how should we divide this?" "Half each," Imo answered faintly as she put Yao Zixio's chinkuan bag into Shang Ruan's arms. Daoist Fangjing heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing her answer. If Imo said she didn't want it, he would have been worried because that would have meant she was either too naive or her temperament wasn't compatible. Furthermore, they were on the 5 Elements platform now and hadn't reached the end of their journey yet. No matter which one it was, there might be problems if they cooperated later. The two of them finished dividing the things and burned the corpses. Daoist Fangjing hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Fellow Daoist Yi, should we take Madame Yao with us?" Imo paused for a moment. If she was alone, she wouldn't mind taking her along. She wasn't a good person who showed excessive kindness, but she found Shang Ruan very pleasing to the eye. Nevertheless, there were only 2 of them now. She could also see that Daoist Fangjing didn't want to take Shang Ruan with him. A seriously injured cultivator who couldn't fight would only drag them down. Imo thought for a while, then shook her head. "Let's think about how to get out of here first." The illusory formation had been broken, so their thoughts were naturally useless here. However, they didn't know what would happen if they left this stone platform. "Oh, fellow Daoist Duke?" Daoist Fangjing shouted as he pointed towards the depths of the hall. Imo followed his finger and looked. She was instantly delighted. This place looked like a hall, but the ground was actually empty. There was only this large floating stone platform, and underneath it was a boundless void. Imo didn't know what it was. The only door in this hall was the one they came in from. Before the illusory formation was activated, it seemed like they could manipulate the stone platforms with their thoughts. But now that the 5 stone platforms had merged into one and the illusory formation had been broken, their thoughts were no longer useful. But now, in the depths of the hall, where the stone wall used to be, a door had appeared. Apparently, the illusory formation had been broken, and the entrance leading to the depths of the Immortal's cave had also been opened. Imotienga quickly calmed down after feeling delighted. Fellow Daoist Fangjing, this illusory formation alone is already so brilliant. If we want to continue, we have to be even more careful. An excited expression appeared on Daoist Fangjing's face as he nodded repeatedly. For him, there was nothing more important than fated chances. Although they didn't obtain any benefits from the illusory formation trial, the illusory formation was so powerful, so if they could find something, it definitely wouldn't be simple. Since they came this far, there was no reason to turn back. Although Imotienga didn't want treasures as urgently as Daoist Fangjing, she also had no reason to retreat. It has to be said that even if Qin Shoujing had a nascent soul cultivator as an ancestor, he still had to walk his own path of cultivation. He couldn't rely on his elders for everything. If he didn't experience it himself, he would never grow under the wings of his elders. But how are we going to get there? Under the stone platform was an endless void, but they didn't know what it was. If this was a killing formation and they triggered something, Daoist Fangjing also frowned. Among the 9 people who came here, 6 died and 1 was seriously injured. Now, only the 2 of them were still in good condition. He didn't have much time left in his lifespan. He urgently needed fated chances, but he also cherished his life even more. After thinking for a while, Daoist Fangjing heaved a sigh. He opened the spiritual beast pouch on his waist and released a spiritual beast. It was a first-rank bird. Daoist Fangjing stroked the bird's head, then released it, letting the bird fly into the depths of the hall according to his instructions. The bird screeched, then flapped its wings and flew in the direction he pointed. The 2 of them watched on with trepidation, but they saw the bird successfully reaching the other end of the hall and going through the door. After a while, the bird went through the door again and flew back. Daoist Fangjing was delighted. It's very safe. Fellow Daoist Yi, let's go. Right after he said that, he took the lead and flew away. Imotienga looked at Shangruan, who was lying unconscious on the ground. She sighed, then took out a medicine bottle and put it in her pocket. She also summoned the white silk handkerchief and followed after them. Chapter 164. Imotienga stepped onto the white silk handkerchief and entered the door inside the main hall. She looked around and saw that it was still a narrow stone passage, just like when they came in. However, the walls here were inlaid with moonstones, so they didn't need to light a fire like when they came in. Moonstones rarely lasted for several thousand years. An immortal's cave from several thousand years ago should be as dark as the passage they first came in, so how could there still be moonstones here? Daoist Fangjing also thought so. The 2 of them stood in front of the wall and pried off a moonstone each. This, after studying it for a while, Daoist Fangjing said, seems to be mother moonstones. Imotienga was confused. Daoist Fangjing looked carefully for a while, then nodded. Yes, there's a moonstone mine here. These are all mother moonstones, so they can last for so long. In terms of experience, Daoist Fangjing had mingled in both the cultivation world and the secular world for several hundred years, so he naturally had a lot of experience. Upon hearing what he said, Imotienga nodded, then threw the mother of moonstone into her Qianquan bag, then continued to walk forward. Although moonstone mines were rare, they had no other use in the cultivation world except for illumination, so they weren't precious. The 2 of them cautiously walked on the stone slabs. Ever since they entered Kunwu, they'd encountered countless dangerous situations, so Imotienga had always been cautious. In her opinion, Daoist Fangjing's behavior was very similar to second uncle's. Her way of doing things was developed when she was with second uncle, so she and Daoist Fangjing were very compatible. This time, Daoist Fangjing let the first-rank bird explore the way in front of them. The 2 of them walked without any mishaps. There were several traps in the passage, but the spiritual aura had dissipated due to the passage's long history. With the bird leading the way, they managed to avoid them one by one. However, they found several corpses on the ground. These corpses were intertwined with each other and had all turned into skeletons. Their clothes had long been rotten, leaving only a few damaged magic tools and intact qiankuan bags. Among the corpses, there were some treasures, materials, or magic weapons. Daoist Fangjing immediately looked happy and crouched down to pick them up. Mo Tiange shouted, "Fellow Daoist Fangjing, wait." Daoist Fangjing looked up at her with vigilance in his eyes. At his age, he'd gone through many adventures and seen his companions fighting over things. Now that he heard Mo Tiange shouting at him to stop, he immediately became vigilant. Based on his expression, how could Mo Tiange not guess what he meant? Nevertheless, she only said faintly, "There are so many skeletons here, and they weren't a group of people. However, all of them died here, so maybe there's some mystery behind it." Upon hearing what she said, Daoist Fangjing finally relaxed and once again looked carefully. Sure enough, there were more than 20 corpses on this passage, which was only about 100 feet long. They were almost densely packed together, and there was no place for them to step on. Looking at their postures, they were all twisted together in groups of 2 or 3, as if they were going to perish together. Daoist Fangjing was so terrified that he broke out in a cold sweat. Judging from their postures, these people had fought each other to death. Moreover, their corpses were of different degrees of age. The bones of the newer corpses were snow white while the bones of the older corpses were black. A cultivator's body didn't have any impurities, so it wouldn't rot. However, it would turn into spiritual aura and disperse, but the bones left behind could be preserved for a long time. Based on the color of the bones, one could tell how long they'd been dead. The skeletons in front of them were of different bone types. Among them, the blackest ones had almost turned into a pile of black ash, which meant they'd been dead for at least several thousand years. However, there were also some snow-white ones among them, which meant they'd been dead for no more than 1,000 years. They all knew how powerful the illusory formation outside was. Out of 9 people, only the 2 of them made it here in one piece. Besides, the spiritual aura fluctuation outside the valley couldn't have existed all the time. Otherwise, they wouldn't have never heard of it. In other words, not many people came here in the past several thousand years. The magic weapons, magic tools, and rare materials scattered all over the ground also proved that no one left safely. That being the case, how could the treasures in front of them be taken at will? Daoist Fangjing couldn't help but feel a bit ashamed when he realized this. In the beginning, he didn't take Mo Tiange seriously. He only thought she was a disciple who just left the cultivation group. Although her cultivation level was high, her ability was probably very ordinary, just like Gigu School's Lu and Wang. However, he never thought she'd wake him up with a single sentence in the illusory formation. Now that she was here, she was much calmer than him. After experiencing these 2 things, he no longer dared to look down on Mo Tiange. "Fellow Daoist, in your opinion, there's something wrong with this path," Mo Tiange said slowly. "It seems to be able to confuse people's minds." Even inside the illusory formation, her spirit-concealing pendant didn't feel anything strange because the illusory formation didn't erode people's minds. Instead, it tested people's temperament and willpower. However, as soon as she approached this path, her spirit-concealing pendant instantly turned ice-cold as if it was warning her. The cultivators who could reach this place must have passed the illusory formation on the 5 elements platforms, so their temperaments should be extremely stable. Aside from willpower problems, what other reason could make them lose their rationality and commit suicide together? These people understood the principle of being alive to enjoy natural treasures. "How did fellow Daoist know?" Mo Tiange said faintly, "I have a magic tool that can sense things that confuse people." After giving a simple explanation, she didn't say anything else. She had a unique treasure on her, so she didn't need to explain it too clearly. Daoist Fangjing was also a smart person, so he didn't ask any more questions. The 2 of them carefully searched for any strange objects in their surroundings. This stone path wasn't different from the previous one. It was a simple stone path carved out of the mountain. The only difference was that the ground was a bit flat, and the mountain wall was inlaid with moonstones. Oh! As soon as she approached the stone wall, the spirit-concealing pendant's ice-cold feeling became even stronger. Could it be that there was something wrong with the stone wall? Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then took out her flying sword to pry out another moonstone from the stone path. The lustrous white light wasn't any different from the moonstones from before, but this faint spiritual aura gave her a familiar feeling. "Fellow Daoist Yi!" Daoist Fangjing suddenly shouted, "This isn't a moonstone." As he said that, he immediately took out heart-calming talismans, stuck one on himself, then gave another to Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. In the illusory formation, it was her own emotions that were fluctuating, so the spirit-concealing pendant was useless. However, in this place, it was an external factor that had no effect on her due to the spirit-concealing pendant. Nevertheless, after some thought, she still took the heart-calming talisman and stuck it on herself. She then held the moonstone and asked, "Fellow Daoist said this isn't a moonstone? Then what is it?" "This is a bewitching moonstone." Daoist Fangjing wasn't as relaxed as Mo Tiange. He forced himself to calm down, then answered, "A kind of bewitching moonstone is often found in moonstone mines. This kind of thing can cause people to hallucinate, so it's a good material for making illusory formations. However, although moonlight stone mines are not rare, bewitching moonlight stones are very rare, and not many people know about them. I only saw a small piece in a secret shop a few decades ago, and that small piece was auctioned for over 1,000 spirit stones." At this point, Daoist Fangjing's gaze was filled with excitement. "I never expected the master of this immortal's cave could actually find so many bewitching moonstones. If I can take all of them?" As she quietly sensed the spiritual aura emitted by this bewitching moonstone, a thought flashed through Mo Tiange's mind. She suddenly thought of something. She reached into her Qianquan bag and rummaged through it. She took out several jade fragments and compared them with this bewitching moonstone. Sure enough, they were made of the same material. It was just that these fragments had exhausted their spiritual aura and were already broken. More than 10 years ago, when she just built her foundation, she and Wei Jiasi once encountered the bewitching twin monsters during the demonic beast riot. The bewitching twin monster was born with wisdom. It designed an illusory formation that almost made the two of them kill each other. In the end, she obtained this jade fragment. Now, it seemed this jade fragment was indeed a bewitching moonstone. Upon realizing this, Mo Tiange couldn't help but feel apprehensive as she looked at the wall full of bewitching moonstones. Back then, a formation laid with only a piece of stone was able to trap her and Wei Jiasi, two foundation-building cultivators. There were so many bewitching moonstones here. If they were all used to lay a formation, wouldn't its power be so great that even nascent soul cultivators would find it difficult to escape? Just like Daoist Fangjing, Mo Tiange's eyes also lit up. The two of them didn't say anything. Each of them picked up their flying swords, then cautiously pried the bewitching moonstones on the wall. However, if this thing could be broken so easily, so many cultivators wouldn't have died here. After approaching the bewitching moonstones for a long time, Mo Tiange realized she wasn't very clear-headed. Fortunately, she had the spirit-concealing pendant, so she immediately distanced herself from them. Just as she was about to warn Daoist Fangjing, she raised her head and saw a sword flash in front of her. Daoist Fangjing's eyes shone with an ominous glint as he thrust the small flying sword he used to pry the bewitching moonstones at her. Mo Tiange raised her hand, creating a spiritual aura wall to block Daoist Fangjing's thrust. Soon after, she retreated and lifted her hand to release the shuttle of flying Apsara. Without saying a word, Daoist Fangjing put away the small flying sword and took out his horsetail whisk. With a flick of his horsetail whisk, thousands upon thousands of needle-like strands of horsetail whisk shot towards her. Although the quality of this horsetail whisk magic tool wasn't as good as her shuttle of flying Apsara, Mo Tiange didn't dare to look down on it. Daoist Fangjing's spiritual aura was rich, so although his magic tool wasn't very good, its power was great. She immediately flung her sleeve and threw the white silk handkerchief, which turned into a wall and blocked his attack. Taking advantage of this gap, Mo Tiange shouted, "Fellow Daoist Fangjing, wake up!" Daoist Fangjing didn't react at all. He was still rushing towards her with his head covered. Tiange had no choice but to use the shuttle of flying Apsara to tie him down while retreating. Although Daoist Fangjing wasn't weak, he couldn't be considered much compared to Xianxia school's elite disciples. It was just that Tiange didn't want to hurt him. At this point, she only had Daoist Fangjing as her companion, and the master of this place was very good at hallucinatory techniques. Who knew what she would encounter later? Having someone to keep her company and remind her from time to time was much better than being alone. However, Daoist Fangjing, who was in front of her, showed no signs of waking up. He was still attacking her mercilessly. Tiange felt helpless. She kept parrying his attacks while slowly retreating. After all, this place was too close to the bewitching moonstone. If she was a bit further away, the effect would probably be a bit weaker. Daoist Fangjing's gaze finally became sober after he retreated about 100 feet. He stopped attacking and said with astonishment, "Fellow Daoist, this..." Tiange heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that he had regained his consciousness. It's good that fellow Daoist has regained his consciousness. This bewitching moonstone is really powerful. Chapter 165. Although Daoist Fangjing regained his consciousness, the problem still wasn't solved. They were at the entrance of this stone path, but Daoist Fangjing was still affected even with heart-calming talismans. If they went deeper, Tiange wasn't sure she could pass. Thus, they reached an impasse. The two of them discussed several methods, but they still couldn't find a solution. There were so many bewitching moonstones that they couldn't pass with their current strength. What should we do? Daoist Fangjing turned around and asked. After being reminded by Tiange again and again, he was now used to asking this junior for advice. Tiange couldn't think of a solution, but she was unwilling to turn back. In the previous trial, 6 out of 9 people died, 1 was half dead, and only 2 were in good condition. How could she be willing to turn back after paying such a price? But she wasn't strong enough. Perhaps the master of this place laid this path to stop cultivators below the core formation realm. If they forced their way through, wouldn't they lose their lives? Tiange pondered for a while, then clenched her teeth. We can't take this path anymore. Fellow Daoist Fangjing, let's find another way. This Daoist Fangjing was obviously unwilling. With a reluctant expression on his face, he looked at the bewitching moonstone's passage several times. Tiange said, "With our current strength, we can't pass this path. I don't want to lose my life here." Daoist Fangjing also hesitated upon hearing that. He naturally understood that Tiange was different from him. Based on the numerous treasures she had, she should be a disciple of a big cultivation group. She had such a high cultivation level at such a young age, so it wasn't worth the risk. If his companions were the same as him, they might grit their teeth and go through it together, just like the cultivators who died here. However, he couldn't summon the courage to do so without a companion. This kind of hallucinatory thing affected people's minds. It didn't mean they wouldn't kill each other if they didn't have a companion. If they lost their minds, they'd go crazy. At that time, even if there was no companion, they'd still hurt themselves. All right, since fellow Daoist Yi said so. Daoist Fangjing finally made up his mind. Although he didn't have much time left in his lifespan, he wasn't completely hopeless. He was unwilling to die here. He thought for a while, then said, "But should we look for another place?" Not to mention Daoist Fangjing, even Tiange felt unwilling. He had nearly lost his life when he descended the valley. In the illusory formation, he had seen the others die or get heavily injured. In the end, he was unable to take another step forward. How could he be willing to give up? Alright. However, fellow Daoist Fangjing, if we can't find it, it's best we leave as soon as possible. Of course, Daoist Fangjing hastily answered. This place was filled with danger. Of course, he didn't want to stay any longer. She watched as Daoist Fangjing knocked on the short passage and carefully examined it, but she just stood there and didn't move. She wondered what was wrong with the whole thing. First of all, although the spiritual qi coming from the valley was pure, it wasn't vast. If a cultivator above the core formation stage were to pass by, they wouldn't care at all. As for when they went down the valley with their cultivation levels, they could only barely pass through, which was why aura refining cultivators were blocked outside the valley. However, if they were core formation cultivators, it would be very easy for them. Then there was the illusory formation. If a core formation cultivator went through the trial of the inner demon, even if they couldn't break the illusory formation, they would still be scared but not in danger. They definitely wouldn't end up with such a tragic outcome like the 6 dead and 1 injured core formation cultivator. Based on these previous characteristics, they came to a conclusion. Although they didn't know who left this valley behind, it was targeted at foundation-building cultivators. However, foundation-building cultivators simply didn't dare to step on this path. No matter how they thought about it, it didn't seem right. In that case, either this path was fake and there was another path leading to the next step, or the owner of this place was too vile and deliberately set up this trap. Once she thought up to this point, Tiange once again wondered what kind of existence this valley was in the end. Judging from the valley's illusory formation and the layout of this bewitching moonstone passage, the owner of this place obviously had a powerful cultivation level. She guessed he must have been in the nascent soul realm or above. An immortal's cave left behind by a nascent soul cultivator should have been of interest to other nascent soul cultivators. In that case, it seemed like the owner deliberately wanted to attract foundation-building cultivators. Once she thought up to this point, Tiange was terrified. Soon after, she recalled that this immortal's cave had obviously been empty for a long time, so there shouldn't be any sinister purpose. But how could she explain the owner's actions? What about the cultivators who died under the bewitching moonstone? Deliberately attracting foundation-building cultivators and letting them die here, what benefit did the owner of this immortal's cave get? Or was it really just a vile interest? A vile interest that could cost human lives? Wasn't it too cruel? Fellow Daoist Yi. Daoist Fangzheng suddenly called out in surprise. Tiange turned around and saw Daoist Fangzheng pointing at a stone wall. Look, there's a door here. Tiange walked closer to take a closer look. Sure enough, there was a fine crack on the stone wall that looked like a door. Let me try. As Daoist Fangzheng said that, he retreated a little then swung his horsetail whisk. The whisk's wisps surged with spiritual aura as he struck the door with all his might. A loud noise came from the stone door, but it was easily pushed open. Tiange was stunned. This seemed a bit too easy. The two of them cautiously looked inside. It seemed to be a stone room. It was smaller than the main hall, but it was a bit bigger than ordinary stone rooms in immortals' caves. It looked like a small hall. It was empty inside, with only a few stone sculptures and a few large round stones hanging from the ceiling, illuminating the entire room. Sunstone! Daoist Fangzheng cried out in surprise. Sunstone! Tiange was puzzled. Correct. Daoist Fangzheng smiled. Fellow Daoist Yi, with these sunstones, even if we return now, this trip won't be in vain. Daoist Fangzheng explained, for us cultivators, moonstones are only used for illumination, just like the lamps in the mortal world. However, these sunstones can produce the effect of sunlight, and they can even be used to produce sun-real fire. The effect of sunlight, sun-real fire. Tiange only took a moment to understand how precious this thing was. There was no need to mention sun-real fire. It was one of the 3 best real fires for concocting medicinal pills and refining tools. In the cultivation world, the furnace fire used for concocting medicinal pills and refining tools was also very particular. Cultivators could use Dantian real fire to concoct medicinal pills and refine tools, but using Dantian real fire required too much spiritual aura. Even nascent soul cultivators would be exhausted if they used Dantian real fire for a long time. Therefore, all cultivators with the right conditions used external fires. The so-called external fires included heavenly fire and earthly fire. Heavenly fire was the fire of the sun, but using the fire of the sun involved quite complicated formations and tools. As for earthly fire, Danding School's original Mount Tianhua was a typical example of earthly fire. The extreme of heavenly fire was sun-real fire, The extreme of earthly fire was earthly pole real fire, and there was also samadhi real fire, which was the number one fire above the other two. These three fires were called the three great real fires. Samadhi real fire only existed in legends. No one had seen it for many years, and even the method to cultivate this fire was lost. Therefore, the best external fires for concocting medicinal pills and refining tools in the world were sun real fire and earthly pole real fire. If this sunstone could produce sun real fire, its value definitely wouldn't be lower than that of a small vein of earthly fire. If it was sold, its price would probably reach more than 10,000 spirit stones. If that was the case with this sunstone, their trip wouldn't just be worthwhile, it would be a great harvest. However, Immortal didn't think they could obtain this sunstone easily. Based on the previous trials, it didn't make sense for them to obtain benefits so easily this time. Daoist Fangzheng also thought so the two of them were extremely careful. They first let the bird explore the path and only stepped into the stone room after they confirmed there were no problems. However, when they reached the stone slab at the entrance, a rumble suddenly rang out and the stone door behind them instantly dropped. The two of them simply didn't have time to react and were already locked inside this stone room. After a moment of shock, Immortal calmed down. If she didn't react at all, it would have been even more strange. This journey was full of dangers. If the treasure was right in front of them and they were allowed to take it, there would probably be even more vicious traps behind them. The two of them stopped in place. Immortal asked, "Fellow Daoist Fangzheng, what do you think will be here?" Daoist Fangzheng stroked his beard. "In front of us are miasma, gales, illusory formations, and bewitching moonlight stones. Every place is dangerous, so I'm afraid this trial won't be easy. However, if you think about it carefully, the miasma and gales will test our defensive methods, the illusory formations will test our temperament and willpower, and the bewitching moonlight stones will test whether we can resist the temptation of treasures all over the ground and whether we can control ourselves and not lose our minds. However, none of these trials tested our ability in fights of magical powers. In my opinion, it's very possible that..." Before he could finish speaking, they suddenly heard an earth-shaking sound as if something was knocking heavily on the stone wall. Immortal turned around and found the source of the sound. She furrowed her brows. It was the first stone statue leaning against the wall in the stone room. It suddenly took a step forward and walked heavily towards them. Daoist Fangzheng also saw it, causing his breathing to stagnate. The two of them didn't take this stone sculpture seriously at all. When they saw it just now, they thought it was just a decoration of this place, like a mural carved on the wall. But in the blink of an eye, it actually turned into a living creature. Fellow Daoist, this Immortal had already activated her protective aura and summoned the white silk handkerchief and the shuttle of flying Apsara. The answer to what this trial was about had already appeared. Daoist Fangzheng's guess was right. This trial tested their ability in fights of magical powers. This stone sculpture was more than 10 feet tall, which was equivalent to the height of two people. Its facial features were clearly carved. It was in the shape of a warrior. The iron armor on its body was even more distinct, and the stone sword in its hand was also carved with visible lines. A moment ago, it clearly didn't have any spiritual aura, but now it was full of spiritual aura, just like a peak stage foundation building cultivator. Immortal quickly calculated in her mind. Both she and Daoist Fangzheng were in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Although this stone sculpture was equivalent to a peak stage foundation building cultivator, it was, after all, an inanimate object with a cumbersome body. Presumably, it wouldn't be difficult to defeat it. However, the sound this stone sculpture made when it stepped on the ground was akin to an earthquake, so it most likely used a lot of strength. Immortal had to be careful not to use her body to resist it. Just as she was thinking, the stone sculpture arrived in front of them step by step. It lifted its arm and swung its stone sword down heavily. Chapter 166. Neither of them dared to fight the stone sword head-on. The moment the stone sculpture swung down, Immortal and Daoist Fangzheng both dodged it. With a loud rumble, the flagstones on the ground caved in and shattered. Both Mo Tiange and Daoist Fangjing's expressions changed. They knew a nascent soul cultivator's Immortal's cave must have been reinforced with materials, but the sword the stone sculpture swung down didn't seem to use much strength, yet it easily pierced through the flagstones. They asked themselves if they could do it. Without much time to think, the stone sculpture swung its sword again. The power of this sword strike was also very fierce. However, just as they guessed, this stone sculpture's strength was great and its body was cumbersome, but its speed was also very slow. And speed was precisely what she was good at. Stepping on the white silk handkerchief, Mo Tiange dashed away without being touched by the stone sculpture in the slightest. Daoist Fangjing also judged the situation in a flash. After he dodged the stone sculpture's second attack, he swung the horsetail whisk in his hand. The whisk turned into thousands of long threads that pierced the stone sculpture. In Mo Tiange's opinion, Daoist Fangjing's horsetail whisk wasn't a high-grade magic tool, but she didn't know how Daoist Fangjing refined it, but it was extremely powerful. This technique of transforming whisks into threads was similar to the flying needles she often used to launch sneak attacks. Moreover, while the flying needles were tangible, the whisks were intangible, and the only thing that increased was the spiritual aura. The thousands of whisks suddenly flew at an extremely fast speed. The stone sculpture couldn't dodge them, or rather, it didn't dodge them at all. Its entire body was enveloped by the whisks. The spiritual aura surged and countless dust rose. Both Mo Tiange and Daoist Fangjing were stunned. Soon after, they both retreated, held their breaths, and waved their sleeves. This Immortal's cave had been closed for countless years, so the stone sculpture was already covered in dust. Daoist Fangjing's attack sent all the dust flying. The two of them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They made such a blunder as soon as they attacked. However, the stone sculpture wasn't damaged at all. The two of them couldn't help but look serious. "Fellow Daoist Yi." Daoist Fangjing's expression darkened. "This thing's defense is amazing, it can't be damaged." Mo Tiange didn't know, but he clearly knew that he had painstakingly practiced this shape-shifting technique for more than 100 years. If he used it on a late-stage foundation-building cultivator, his defensive barrier would be broken, but this stone sculpture wasn't affected at all. Once Daoist Fangjing spoke, the stone sculpture paused for a moment as if it was listening to him. In the next second, it adjusted its direction, then suddenly swung its sword at Daoist Fangjing. The power of this sword strike was indeed terrifying. Daoist Fangjing managed to dodge it in time, but he was still injured by the sword aura, causing him to let out a muffled groan. Mo Tiange acted just in time. The shuttle of flying Apsara transformed into several golden rays that flew towards the stone statue. After several poochie-poochie sounds, Mo Tiange's expression darkened. The flying Apsara shuttle's golden light didn't even leave a mark on the stone statue. Ever since she obtained the shuttle of flying Apsara, Mo Tiange had always relied on this magic tool. Later on, she heard from Lord Daoist Jinghe that its main material was thousand-year-old gold essence which was mixed with heavenly transformation stone, making it comparable to a magic weapon. It was a magic tool he specially made for Qin Shoujing when he built his foundation. Thousand-year-old gold essence was usually used on flying swords to increase their sharpness, so although the shuttle of flying Apsara didn't have any sharp edges, it was still very sharp. Up until now, she hadn't encountered anything that could be cut by the golden rays. Nevertheless, the shuttle of flying Apsara was completely useless against this stone statue. Mo Tiange's expression darkened. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. However, she suddenly heard Daoist Fangjing, who was struggling under the stone statue's attack, shouting, "Use spells! Use spells to attack!" Mo Tiange was startled, but she immediately reacted. She withdrew the shuttle of flying Apsara, then made a hand seal to cast the cold wind spell. Stone came from earth, wood suppressed earth, wind came from wood, water came from wood. This cold wind spell was a compound spell of the 5 elements, which included water and wood elements. The stone statue's speed was originally slow, so the cold wind spell just happened to hit its weak point. Once the cold wind spell was cast, the stone statue slowed down and its speed became even slower. Although its strength and sword aura were astonishing, its speed was extremely slow. It simply couldn't hit Daoist Fangjing's body. Daoist Fangjing was finally able to extricate himself. Fellow Daoist Yi. Daoist Fangjing's breathing was heavy. Obviously his injuries weren't light. Earth suppresses water. It'd be better to directly use a wood entanglement spell to bind it. I tested it just now. Its sword aura is in a straight line, so we just need to avoid it. Tiange didn't say anything and just nodded. Instead of using the cold wind spell, she clasped her hands together, condensed spiritual aura, and started to cast the high-level wood element spell, rustling fallen wood. Countless withered leaves rose, the wind whistled, and countless vines grew from the ground, binding the stone statue. Wood spiritual aura shot towards the stone statue. Under the green light that filled the sky, the stone statue was bound by the vines and couldn't budge. It wanted to brandish its sword, but the vines once again wrapped around its sword-wielding hand. Neither the horsetail whisk nor the shuttle of flying Apsara could break the stone statue. Under the entanglement of Wood's spiritual aura, it was finally firmly restrained. But this wasn't the end. Although this stone statue was restrained by Wood's spiritual aura, Tiange's cultivation level wasn't high enough, so she couldn't directly knock it down and could only bind it. Moreover, this stone statue's strength was astonishing, so it would take a lot of effort to bind it. Fellow Daoist Fangjing. Tiange couldn't help but furrow her brows when she sensed the spiritual aura in her body was draining like crazy. I'm consuming too much spiritual aura. I can't hold on for too long. Daoist Fangjing also clasped his hands together and started to cast a wood element spell. With Daoist Fangjing's support, Tiange finally heaved a sigh of relief. She had never encountered an opponent who directly relied on formidable strength like this. Even though it was a stone statue without any intelligence, it was still very difficult to deal with. She recalled the time she encountered a 5th-rank double-headed eagle during the demonic beast riot. Her cultivation level was a bit lower than it was now, but she didn't feel this helpless. She couldn't blame the ancients for saying one strong man can defeat 10 skilled men. The hardest technique to crack was having no technique at all. Amidst the sky-filling green light, the stone statue once again turned around to listen, seemingly looking for the source of the spiritual aura. Tiange's heart stirred. She raised her hand and threw the shuttle of flying Apsara again. This time, it turned into a long golden thread and shot towards the stone statue's ears. This time, the golden thread drilled into the stone statue's ears without any obstruction. With a soft rip, the stone statue's body became heavy and it stopped moving. Tiange stopped casting the spell and focused on controlling the shuttle of flying Apsara. Clanging sounds rang out incessantly. A moment later, the momentum from the stone statue's body dissipated and it finally stopped moving. However, in an instant, it released a strange spiritual aura. Daoist Fangjing finally caught his breath. He asked, "Fellow Daoist Yi, how did you know its weakness was its ears?" Tiange wiped the sweat on her face and answered, "Fellow Daoist, did you notice? Before it makes a move, it always listens first." "I see." Daoist Fangjing sighed in admiration. He thought in his heart that women were indeed more meticulous. Although he noticed something was wrong, he didn't expect this to be its weakness. Tiange put away the shuttle of flying Apsara and the white silk handkerchief, then looked at Daoist Fangjing. "Fellow Daoist, how's your injury?" Daoist Fangjing hastily swallowed a medicinal pill, then shook his head. "It's nothing." "It's just a small injury." Tiange didn't ask anymore. She walked forward, then crouched down to examine the stone statue. When she was controlling the shuttle of flying Apsara, she sensed that the inside of the stone statue wasn't made of stone like the outside. However, no matter how she looked at it, it was a whole piece of stone without any cracks. After Daoist Fangjing took the medicinal pill, he also walked towards her and said, "That's strange. This stone is so hard. How can we open it?" Tiange tilted her head and pondered for a moment, then she started to feel the stone statue's head. There weren't any connecting gaps. but there were traces of casting. In other words, this stone statue could actually be melted? She wondered what kind of real fire would be needed to melt such a hard stone. Could this be the art of engineering? She muttered to herself. The art of engineering had been lost in the cultivation world for a long time. She only heard that some people could make aura refining puppets to guard mansions and serve tea, but their fighting abilities were weak. This stone statue obviously didn't have any external spiritual aura supporting it, but its cultivation level was in the peak stage of the foundation building realm. If it was the art of engineering, wouldn't it have been lost a long time ago? Fellow Daoist, ye also knows about the art of engineering? Daoist Fangjing asked curiously. Mo Tiange raised her head. I read about it in a book. Could it be that Daoist Fangjing knows about this technique? Daoist Fangjing smiled bitterly. Of course not. The art of engineering has long been lost. I'm just an individual cultivator, how could I possibly learn it? It's just that I'm an old man who's lived for a long time, so I've heard a lot. I've also heard a bit about the art of engineering. Oh? Then what does fellow Daoist think about this stone statue? Is it the art of engineering? It's very similar. Daoist Fangjing nodded. Cultivators can also use spiritual aura to control puppets. That's not the art of engineering, but this thing can move freely without an owner, so it should be the art of engineering. Mo Tiange also thought the same. In that case, didn't the master of this place know the real art of engineering? After staring at the stone sculpture for a long time, Mo Tiange finally said, Fellow Daoist Fangjing, I want this thing. If there's anything else later, you can choose first. What do you think? This Daoist Fangjing hesitated. He naturally also wanted this stone sculpture. If he brought it out, he could sell it to cultivation clans or cultivation groups. For people who wanted to study the art of engineering, a peak stage foundation building puppet should be worth at least several thousand spirit stones, right? However, when he saw how determined Mo Tiange was, he nodded without hesitation. Firstly, he didn't want to offend her. Secondly, she promised him some benefits, so he'd only lose some spirit stones. Alright, this thing isn't very useful to me. If fellow Daoist Yi wants it, I'll give it to you. Mo Tiange smiled, then put the stone sculpture into her Qiankuan bag. Thank you. I'll definitely keep my promise. If there are treasures later, fellow Daoist can take more. Daoist Fangjing smiled. Just as he was about to say something polite, his expression suddenly changed. He looked behind Mo Tiange and said, Fellow Daoist Yi, look. Upon hearing Daoist Fangjing's cry of alarm, Mo Tiange turned around and her expression also changed. All of a sudden, the other stone sculptures started to move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 stone sculptures. The 2 of them were deathly pale. Even though they already knew the weaknesses of the stone sculptures, there were still too many of them. Mo Tiange didn't have much time to think. She flew up and stopped in midair. The shuttle of flying Apsara turned into a golden ray and went straight for the ears of one of the stone sculptures. That stone sculpture paused, then raised its sword. Its sword aura soared to the sky and blocked the golden ray. Mo Tiange clenched her teeth. Just now, she used the shuttle of flying Apsara while she was trapped by a wood element spell, so the stone sculptures couldn't react at all. But it was different now. No matter how slow these stone sculptures' reactions were, their sword aura was so powerful that they could block it with just a raise of their hands. What should I do? Her mind raced, but she couldn't think of a solution. Chapter 167. Each of the 5 stone statues was in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Mo Tiange glanced at them and quickly analyzed the situation in her mind. Since the door was already closed, this was a secret room. Aside from defeating these stone statues, there was no other way. They already knew the stone statues' weaknesses, but how to crack their sword aura was still a problem. Each of these 5 stone statues had extraordinary strength. When they brandished their sword aura was overbearing, interweaving into a sword net. Even if they were slow, her shuttle of flying Apsara couldn't break them. Moreover, These stone statues didn't have consciousness, so even a hallucinatory item like the enchanting lantern couldn't affect them. Should I defeat them one by one? Mo Tiange looked at Daoist Fangjing and said, "Fellow Daoist, I'll deal with 4, you deal with 1. Daoist Fangjing immediately nodded. All right. If it was one-on-one, even if their cultivation levels were slightly lower, it wouldn't be too difficult to kill them if they knew their weaknesses. After reaching an agreement with Daoist Fangjing, Mo Tiange stood in midair, took out a talisman from her Qianquan bag and sighed. As the advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul cultivator, how could she not have any treasures? All these years, although Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't teach her about cultivation, he didn't hesitate to give her other things. This time, when she left the mountain, he even gave her several life-saving treasures. However, she thought it was best to handle things she could handle by herself. Relying too much on other things wouldn't be good for her growth. However, it was difficult for her to even keep herself alive now, so she naturally had to use whatever methods she had. Otherwise, if she lost her life, it would be a huge loss. Mo Tiange took the talisman, then closed her eyes and started to chant. Along with the chant, her whole body emitted a white spiritual light like mist. This spiritual light was a symbol of spiritual aura gathering. The spiritual aura became denser and the spiritual light became brighter and brighter. When she finished chanting, she opened her eyes and shouted, "Go!" The talisman was ignited, turning into 4 flames that instantly swept towards the 4 stone statues. The stone statues brandished their swords as if they wanted to cut them like before. But this time, it was useless. The 4 flames didn't move at all. They directly penetrated the sword aura and enveloped the 4 stone statues. The 4 stone statues stopped moving, maintaining their posture of raising their swords. Mo Tiange shouted, "Daoist Fangjing, quickly! I can only maintain it for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn." Once she used this move, the whole stone room was shrouded in spiritual aura. Daoist Fangjing was dumbfounded, but once he heard her shout, he seemed to have woken up from a dream. He hastily pounced on the only remaining stone sculpture. Daoist Fangjing waved his hand, causing a talisman to fly out of his hand. It was the earth element magic art, thick soil carrying the earth. The ground under the stone sculpture's feet instantly turned into yellow soil. The soil directly spread and trapped the sculpture. The stone statue brandished its sword in a daze, but how could it cut through the soil beneath its feet? Taking advantage of this opportunity, Daoist Fangjing raised his horsetail whisk. Countless strands of whisk flew towards the stone statue. This time, the stone statue brandished its sword to block. It finally managed to block the attack. Daoist Fangjing immediately retrieved the whisk thread, then threw several talismans. Foundation-building realm talismans were different from aura-refining realm talismans. Even if you had the money, it would still be very difficult to buy them. This time, Daoist Fangjing really put in a lot of effort. Under the attack of several high-level talismans, the stone statue gradually became unable to wield its sword. Countless whisk threads were once again thrown out. 2 of them drilled into the stone statue's ears. With 2 chi-chi sounds, the stone statue finally stopped moving. Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief. She once again took out another talisman and chanted the incantation, trapping the 4 stone statues just like before. Needless to say, Fangjing flung his horsetail whisk and pierced it into the stone statue's ears. The 4 stone statues fell one by one. Mo Tiange heaved a long sigh. She couldn't hold on any longer, so she fell to the ground. Her legs went soft, so she sat down. These 2 talismans weren't talismans used by ordinary foundation-building cultivators. They were top-grade talismans. In fact, top-grade talismans were like magic weapons. They didn't belong to any rank. Only core formation cultivators and above could draw these talismans. Part of the power of magic weapons was sealed inside them, so their power was extraordinary, just like real magic weapons. It was common knowledge that aura-refining and foundation-building cultivators could also use magic weapons. However, in their hands, they could only display 1% or even 1,000th of the power of magic weapons. They simply couldn't compare to the magic weapons of core formation cultivators or nascent soul cultivators. However, this kind of talisman was different. It sealed the power of real magic weapons. Although it couldn't compare to a nascent soul cultivator's, it wasn't inferior to a core formation cultivator's attack. However, this kind of talisman could only be used once. Even so, activating these two talismans consumed a lot of spiritual aura, so Tiange felt exhausted for a while. Nevertheless, there was someone else next to her, so she didn't dare to rest too much. She swallowed several restorative panaceas, adjusted her breathing, then stood up. Fellow Daoist Fangjing, how is it? Daoist Fangjing also rested for a bit before he stood up to examine the surroundings. Right now, he was carefully examining the things behind the stone statues. Daoist Fangjing didn't stop examining them. He just turned his body slightly and said, "Fellow Daoist Yi, quickly come and take a look." Judging from his tone, he seemed to have discovered something. Tiange stood up and walked towards him. Daoist Fangjing pointed at the stone wall. "Fellow Daoist Yi, look carefully." Tiange moved closer, but she was stunned. She saw that the stone wall was densely engraved with fine murals. These murals were carved meticulously, but their contents were messy. It was as if someone carved something on the wall whenever they thought of it. Some were people, some were flowers, plants, strange beasts, and some were spells. Tiange looked at the murals one by one, but she was pleasantly surprised. The master of this place was indeed a genius. There were some secret techniques she'd never heard of before. For example, there was a kind of teleportation technique called Flash of Wind and Thunder, which could allow the user to retreat several hundred feet away in an instant. If one cultivated it to a higher level, it wouldn't be a problem for them to move several hundred feet away. After all, the so-called teleportation technique had been passed down to the present day, but most of it didn't live up to its name. It merely relied on its extremely fast speed to make it look like teleportation. True teleportation techniques were rarely passed down. They were usually passed down as secret techniques in big cultivation groups. Xianxia School also had one, but only core formation cultivators could practice their teleportation technique. There were also some carelessly written spells that were incomplete, which made Tiange quite disappointed. She hoped to find some records of mechanisms, but unfortunately, there was none. In the end, Tiange found a paragraph of text in the corner. "My name is Su Jiwei, a disciple of Venerable Swordsman Xuanzu of Gujian sect. I formed my gold core at 100 years old, entered the nascent soul realm at 300 years old, betrayed Gujian sect at 400 years old, lived in seclusion in the Wind Breath Valley of Mount Jiuling in Jin Country, called myself Wanderer Ziwei. I've lived here in seclusion for 1,000 years, never taking even half a step into Kunwu. Every time I think about the first half of my life, I'm filled with pain and regret. I couldn't see Xylan one last time before I passed away. My 1,000-year regret, the engravings at the end were messy." Tiange carefully examined them and found that they were the two words, Xylan, written over and over again. Xylan, this was obviously a name, and it sounded like it belonged to a woman. Wanderer Ziwei didn't mention this name in the other murals, but in this monologue, he repeatedly mentioned it. Judging from his tone, he seemed to miss this person very much, but he didn't dare to mention it. It wasn't until he passed away that he couldn't help but write it down. After reading this paragraph, Tiange couldn't help but feel puzzled. This Wanderer, since he was a disciple of Gujian sect and he formed his nascent soul at such a young age, why did he betray the sect? For a big cultivation group like Gujian sect, betraying the sect was a very serious matter. Even if there was a conflict, since he was already in the nascent soul realm, he could have left the mountain and become an elder in name. There was no need for him to betray the sect. Moreover, after he betrayed the sect, he lived in seclusion in the secular world. It seemed like he didn't want anything, so it didn't seem like he had a conflict of interest. But if there was no conflict of interest, why did he betray the sect? Later, he said that every time he thought about the first half of his life, he was filled with pain and regret. A cultivator from a big cultivation group formed his nascent soul at such a young age. What pain could he have experienced in the first half of his life? What could make him regret to the point of death? If these matters were connected, betraying the sect because of regret, living in seclusion in the secular world because of regret. How serious was this matter? Finally, there was that Xylan. For a nascent soul cultivator, was there anything they couldn't see if they wanted to see someone? Unless that person had disappeared or he didn't dare to see her. But here came the problem. Disappearing was fine, but what matter was so serious that he didn't dare to see her? Was it related to the matter he regretted? Mo Tiange felt the matter in front of her was confusing and couldn't be explained at all. Daoist Fangzheng also came over to read this passage. He said with astonishment, Gujian sect? The master of this place is actually a senior from Gujian sect, but why is he so proficient in the illusory formation and the art of mechanisms? This doesn't seem like the work of a sword cultivator. Mo Tiange was stunned. Yes, this should be the biggest doubt. Gujian sect was a sect of sword cultivators, so this wanderer Ziwei should also be a sword cultivator. However, his actions didn't seem like a sword cultivator's. When they first entered the valley, they encountered the gales and miasma caused by a formation. Later, they entered an illusory formation. Who could lay this kind of formation unless they were a grandmaster? Moreover, the Flying Five Elements platform almost made people think it was a senior from Tianliang School. Finally, there was this stone room, the peak stage foundation building puppet, and the art of mechanisms. In the cultivation world, the most traditional and most populous cultivators were Dharma cultivators. This kind of cultivators followed the prescribed order on their cultivation path and mainly relied on spells, magic weapons, and medicinal pills. Sword cultivators, talisman cultivators, medical cultivators, martial cultivators, and so on were all unorthodox Daoists. Among them, because sword cultivators were extremely strong in fights of magical powers, they were the most populous group. However, compared to Dharma cultivators, their total number was only 1 in 100. The reason why Dharma cultivators were the most populous was because their studies were orthodox. They could dabble in any kind of unorthodox Daos and had a high chance of making realm breakthroughs. Sword cultivators were strong in fights of magical powers, but they spent their entire lives nurturing their swords, so their chances of making realm breakthroughs were rather low. Therefore, generally, sword cultivators only concentrated on cultivating their swords and rarely learned other things. However, everything laid out here subverted this convention. A sword cultivator who was proficient in formations, the art of mechanisms, and extremely knowledgeable was simply too frightening. Mo Tiange was 100% sure that the master of this place was definitely a rare genius. Fellow Daoist, let's not talk about other things first. Let's take the sunstone first. Daoist Fangzheng was actually thinking about this object after he finished looking at the mural. Right, this object was the most valuable thing here. Mo Tiange didn't oppose him. Alright, I agreed to fellow Daoist's request earlier. Now, fellow Daoist can choose first. Fellow Daoist can take an extra portion. Daoist Fangzheng was beside himself with joy. He immediately flew up and was about to take the sunstone hanging above him. Rumble! A burst of spiritual aura came out of nowhere and struck Daoist Fangzheng down. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.